They got a verdict, y'all. Verdict is in. Oh, Lord, why my heart beating like... Oh, oh my God. Verdict is in. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Y'all, oh my heart is, oh my God. Oh. Oh Lord, why is my heart? Why do I feel like it's me on trial? Lord. Hey, plus size, but I'm just like, oh my God, I know. I just feel like it took too long. It didn't take this long on the federal. Oh God. Oh.
Present. It appears the jury has reached a verdict in this matter. Before we bring the jury in, the court just wants to give somewhat of an admonishment to the folks that are present. Now, whatever this verdict is, it is important that there's not any acting out in the courtroom. There can't be any response either way, whatever the verdict is.
Oh my God.
So please, if you feel as though you cannot handle whatever the verdict may be, please remove yourself from the courtroom now so as to not create a situation in which we have to address. So with that being said, court, we can go ahead and bring it through.
Oh, he said that with authority. Oh, Lord. Full justice for Tyrie.
Y'all can be seated.
Oh,
Ladies and
Lord.
gentlemen, the jury, without stating what the verdict is, as we've talked about before, the court is going to poll the jury to ensure that this is a unanimous verdict. Starting with juror number 1.
Hey, Byron.
Is this your verdict, ma'am?
Yes,
Ma'am?
yes, Your Honor.
Ma'am? Yes, Your Honor.
All white.
Sir? Yes.
Yes.
They believe in the police.
All right. Polling the jury, having found that this is a unanimous verdict, the court will read the verdict
Oh, Lord.
as follows. In indictment 2300241, State of Tennessee versus Darius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith, the counsel would like to stand with their clients.
Oh, my Lord. Lord Jesus. Oh, God.
The verdicts read as follows. Count 1, second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean, not guilty. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley,
Oh, okay. That's
not guilty. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justice Smith.
If you spend the entire day
Oh,
scratching
wow,
your
you
scalp,
lying.
stop making these 3 mistakes. 1.
They not
Sulfates wash
guilty,
away
y'all.
natural oils, which can dry up.
Acting in concert. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean,
Wow.
not guilty. Count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty.
I am too outdone.
Count 2. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 3. Aggravated kidnapping with bodily injury.
Not guilty.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean, not guilty. Count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 3. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 4. Aggravated kidnapping with a deadly weapon. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean, not guilty. Count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 4. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 5. Official misconduct, unauthorized exercise of official authority. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean, not guilty.
Y'all.
Count 5. We, the
Oh, my
jury,
God.
find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty.
Oh, my God.
Count 5. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 6. Official misconduct, refraining from performing a duty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Darius Bean, not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. Count 7, official oppression. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 7, we, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 7, we, the jury, find the defendant, Justin Smith, not guilty. All verdict forms have been signed by the court.
Oh, wow. Unanimously not
Ladies and gentlemen
guilty.
of the jury, you have performed your duty. We appreciate the time and attention that you all have given to this case. We will now excuse you all from the court.
Wow. Wow.
All right, you can be seated. Mr. Bean, Mr. Haley, and Mr. Smith, the jury of your peers have found you not guilty on all charges with these matters. The court will enter the judgment sheets accordingly. And this will conclude your matter that's before the court. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Go ahead, adjourn.
All rise. Court got adjourned 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
He better be crying. Haley better be crying. He better be crying. Y'all did a great job. Y'all better thank the Lord. Y'all should have been screaming, "Thank you, Lord." I don't believe to see the plus size baddie. Oh my God. Oh my God. Unique, I know. Wow. You better be crying. You better be thanking the Lord up above. That again, it was all, they said it was all Caucasian. All Caucasian, and they believed in police enforcement. They better be thanking the Lord. That's why people take justice in their own hands. Yeah. Wow. And they say Hagman has never lost a case. Ooh, Now, I ain't gonna, the state should have made sure some color. Yeah, I don't know. Or maybe they said it's predominantly white in Chattanooga.
But again, now we know the fate more than 2 years after the beating death of Tyre Nichols.
This happening after 22 witnesses.
Kayla, of course, this is by far not the end of the road for these 3 officers.
They got
plus
one more?
The other 2 who were accused in this, Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills. They're all waiting a sentencing from the federal trial that happened last year.
former officer, Justice.
Yeah, now we do know each of them were found guilty of at least one charge at the federal level, and we know that the sentencing will happen for that. They were waiting to see what the outcome of this trial would be before that sentencing would happen. And of course, the one that is up in the air
Wow.
still at the state level is Emmett Martin. Now, he is the one, his name came up multiple times in this trial. He testified in the federal trial, took a deal at the federal level, but at this point, it's not clear what his state plea may look like. We know that he was offered one, but he has not officially accepted one at this time. So it still looks like he will have a separate trial at this point.
We know she's receiving.
Clearly, Kayla, everyone is extremely
And what about
about what has
Mills?
just happened.
Mills.
Again, all three officers are acquitted of all of their charges. We also know that Tyre Nichols' family has been in this courtroom from the very beginning as well. Can you tell us about their thoughts, feelings, emotions as they exited the courtroom today?
Yeah, of course, heading into today, we were told that they were happy with the job that the state did, that the prosecutors did in this case. Now, we just heard from Prosecutor Paul Hagerman that they are planning to speak to us momentarily. So, of course, we'll have that in a second for you. But we heard from the family. They said they were happy with how the state presented themselves. We know Rovon Wells herself was one of the witnesses called up by the state, the very first witness that they called up to the stand. But as soon as the verdict was read, we did see his sister got up as she was trying to leave the courtroom, immediately just overcome with emotions. Now, of course, they couldn't show that emotion within the courtroom or while the verdict was being read because there were very strict instructions handed down by Judge Jones. But we know at this point that they are overwhelmed with emotion, just waiting to hear from them at this point.
The medical examiner.
I have to say, I think a lot of people, Kayla, may be a little taken aback. There was
I am.
an overriding sentiment that while all the charges wouldn't stick, I think that everyone understood that not all 7 would stick against all 3 defendants. There was an overriding sentiment that someone was going to be found guilty in some phase
I thought it was Haley.
of this entire proceeding, but that is not the case. Your thoughts? Again, you've sat through the entire federal trial late last year. You've been through every moment of this, and you've covered this case every step of the way. What are your thoughts?
I'll send it back to you for now.
Yeah, at the federal level, we saw of the 3 defendants that Demetrius Haley received the harshest penalty. He was found guilty of excessive force causing bodily injury at the federal level, and he's been in custody ever since then. We're expecting something similar because there was clear video that showed out of the 3, he was the only one that administered a kick to Tyre Nichols' body. Now, of course, we know that that is not the case, and he has still remained in federal custody since then. But again, he, along with his 2 other co-defendants, all found not guilty of all charges. So at this point, it'll be interesting to see if the state will try this once again. Will we have another trial coming up? Of course, we'll hear from them momentarily.
Okay, it also seems like in this case, defense attorneys really focused on the use of force with these 3 officers, and they really compared it to what happened with Emmett Mills and, of course, Desmond Martin as well. In this case, it seems like, it's very clear, in fact, that the defense attorneys were really able to prove to this jury that their clients, their defendants, whatever force was used, it was not considered to be excessive in this case.
Yeah, they stressed that the Scorpion team goes in, or used to at the point when it was a unit that existed. They used to go into the most
Y'all
dangerous
listen.
neighborhoods and deal with
This
the
is
most
just a clear
dangerous
indication.
suspects. And
It's Chattanooga
did a
Red
picture for the jury
of
that
how they
Hickory Hill,
feel
where this all happened,
and what
that
they
neighborhood
think.
is one of those dangerous neighborhoods. Now, of course, the big question
With
is
the police
why
and
was Nichols pulled over in the
brutality
first place? Why were the blue lights
and
turned on?
immunity.
Now, we heard in the federal case that Emmett Martin was the one who really got this all started. He was the one that he told the team that he saw Nichols driving erratically. He was switching lanes. He was speeding. But he even admitted on the stand at the federal level that that was not true and that he was just angry and he was looking for someone to pull over. So it looks like the defense was effective in using their experts to show that being a police officer is based a lot on impulse and also the environment that you're in. A lot of the decisions that you have to make are on the spot. And they did a good job of also bringing in witnesses to their point that were owners of the credit cards that they say were stolen and found in Nichols's car after the fact.
They didn't have.
It's Fox 13's Kayla Solomon. She's live just outside the courtroom down at Home on Poplar. Kayla, we're going to let you go. I know Paul Hagerman, the assistant DA who tried this case on behalf of the state, is going to be addressing the media shortly. We'll be cutting in or staying here, and we'll be hearing from him shortly.
We also have a second reporter that's down at the courthouse today. That is Fox 13's Jack Bilyeu. You are just stepped out of the courtroom. I know that you've had an opportunity to talk to a few people about their reaction to this case. What have they had to say?
Well, guys, I'll tell you what, just a few minutes before that verdict came down, we saw this presence kind of show up. Take a look back there, Derek. You can see quite a few deputies sort of came out of the woodworks here. I know y'all have seen some of the folks who were standing over behind Kayla's live shot there.
Hey, you died again. I'm sorry. I didn't
at the end of the
speak.
hallway. Around the time that verdict came out, you know, a lot of the folks left. We saw Tyre Nichols' family towards the front of that crowd. They did not look up. They did not say a word. His mother, Rovon Wells, was very sullen. They were flanked by many of the activists who have been so close with that family all along. A lot of them were visibly shaken, visibly crying. They took them into this room back here. We're told that's where prosecutors are actually meeting with the family. They're going to talk this over and then apparently come out and make some kind of statement. Now, behind us here are the elevators. A lot of the defendants' families came out shortly after Tyre Nichols' family. They turned up this hallway, and as they entered that far elevator down the hallway there was a young woman, a relative of one of those former Memphis police officers, who continuously shouted, "Hallelujah, praise Jesus, hallelujah." That went on for probably a minute and a half or so. These elevators don't move very quickly, so they made it in there. She continued yelling. A lot of emotions here. Still no word from the family of Tyre Nichols or those prosecutors that we are waiting on that input. Daryl and Darcy.
That is Fox 13's Jack Bilyeu reporting live downtown at the courthouse today. Again, just a recap to start over again. All three former Memphis police officers. We're talking about Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith. All three were found not guilty on all charges. The major charges, the most severe charges of second-degree murder, and even the lesser charges of official misconduct and, of course, official oppression. All three
I
found
thought
not
they
guilty.
said the burden
Justin Smith, again, all
was
seven
harder
counts,
on
not
federal
guilty.
than it
Tyreus
is
Bean,
on
not
state.
guilty. Demetrius Haley, across the board, the verdict is acquittal for all three on all seven charges. Again, there were several, a couple of dozen lesser charges that all fell under those major charge categories that are basically just wiped off the books after the primary verdicts here of not guilty on all seven counts. 21 counts in total against three defendants. Of course, the jury made up of 8 white women, 4 white men, all from Hamilton County, Chattanooga specifically. There were 2 alternates too, a man and a woman, who were dismissed right before deliberations began.
You know, the defense attorneys in this case, they continue to say that this was simple police work. It was nothing that was out of the ordinary. It was nothing that was considered to be excessive. We have all seen the video time and time again, but they again framed it with these 3 officers. What they were doing, they considered it to be simple police work.
Acting within the scope of their duties and responsibilities given the circumstances that were in front of them.
They followed procedure.
That's the way one of the defense attorneys proposed it early on in opening statements. All right, let's go back to Fox 13 investigative reporter Kayla Solomon again outside the courtroom there. Kayla?
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about that jury makeup. That was one of the first things that we observed on day 1 when they brought in this jury last Monday. You could see that there were 16 total, but only one person was potentially not white. And of course, she was one of the people that did not make it through to this next process. We were told that one juror got sick and another one just simply went home. So yesterday, when it came time, just before deliberation, there were 14 jurors, and they randomly chose 2 to be the alternates. So ultimately it came down to 12 that had to make that final decision. And as you mentioned, it was 8 women and 4 men, all of them white, all of them from Chattanooga. And it seems like what they were told by the defense witnesses as well as the defense attorneys, that's what really rang true for them when it came to deciding on this verdict. And they told the judge in the beginning, this was a unanimous verdict. And of course, they also had lesser charges to consider, but to them, it was not guilty across the board.
And you know, Kayla, one of the things that we have to go back to on literally day one, both the defense and the prosecution seemed very happy with their respective voir dire processes. They were happy with jury selection because jury selection, a lot of times in these instances with trials of this magnitude and the charges of this kind of gravity, that jury selection can take days, sometimes longer than the trial. But in this case, both seemed happy with the makeup.
Yeah, exactly. And it still did take days. It just so happened that it was in Chattanooga. We weren't there for that entire jury selection process. So we were ready to go by day one on April 28th. And for some people, that seems to be a benefit because you're starting from day one instead of having to go through that unpredictable process of jury selection. And you never know how long that can take. And in this case, yes, they were able to start from day one on April 28th. And of course, they went all up until yesterday when deliberations began, and they deliberated from about 12:30 to 5 yesterday, and today they started again at 9:30, and they were done by just before 2 p.m. this afternoon. So total was about 8 hours or so.
Kayla, this has to be a relief clearly for these three officers. They weren't sure really what was going to happen in court today. Again, these state charges, they have walked away. They have been acquitted of all of the state charges, but they still have federal charges to deal with.
Yeah, each of them were found guilty of at least one federal charge at this point, and it's obstruction of justice for what happened afterwards, the conspiracy that people say they committed and that the jury found them guilty of committing right after the beating happened and then the days following. Now, we don't know when the sentencing for that will be, but we do know that a lot of the timing of this all has hinged on what happened here today and what the verdict for this trial would be. Now, of course, the family had said from the beginning they were hoping to get a conviction. They really wanted that second-degree murder charge because that's what they felt this was. And of course, it was video that many of us have seen plenty of times, and people have formed their own opinions. But again, they were hoping, you know, what would happen here in the state trial would hinge a lot on what would happen when it came to the federal sentencing.
Okay, that is Fox 13's Kayla Solomon reporting. This has been a long time coming.
Yes, it has.
This all started in early January of 2023.
It did. As a matter of fact, let's take you back to that night. This is video you've undoubtedly seen so many times. This is after the traffic stop. This is after Tyre Nichols had run from the initial traffic stop, trying to, according to his parents, make it back to his home. This only happened a couple of blocks from his home there in Hickory Hill, January of 2023. And you can see the 3 officers charged, plus 2 others surrounding him there as he's on the ground. This is, as I said, this video it's been played over and over again in the media. They saw it dozens and dozens and dozens of times this past week in court.
But something that we as viewers did not see, that jurors were able to see, and attorneys were able to see. We've seen the video just kind of playing itself out. In court, these jurors were able to see it literally frame by frame. They slowed it down so they were able to see the involvement and impact of each officer involved in this case with Tyre Nichols.
I can't
were
believe
able
it
to see
either.
exactly where each officer was positioned.
I can't believe
Each
it either.
officer, how close they got to Nichols' body. Every strike,
I am too
every kick,
outdone.
every punch, every hit with the baton. They were able to determine who was involved, which officer was involved.
Now, this particular piece of video that we have on a loop right here, this is not the actual attack. The beating is, quite frankly, it's still a little hard for a lot of people to watch. So we've distilled that down. That was the aftermath and the officers standing and I want to say evaluating the situation there. That was Skycop video from that night. And as you said, Darcy, it was John Keith Perry, a defense attorney for Tadarius Bean, who said over and over again, my client, speaking of Tadarius Bean, never struck him in the head, never struck him, never kicked him. I mean, he went through, as you said, frame by frame, and the video that the jury saw also had each officer labeled. It was very different from our view. It was the same view, but, you know, there were a lot of analytical features in the video that were able to let the jury understand what was right in front of them, and that's what they saw. And you have to say that Perry, Stingel, and Zimmerman, the 3 defense attorneys did an outstanding job in planting that seed of doubt in this jury of 12.
And clearly in this case, it worked. Again, all 5 officers are already awaiting sentencing in the federal trial from last year. And as Fox 13 has told you, this is trial number 2 out of 3.
Yes, another one.
Now, the family of Tyre Nichols is suing the city for $550 million. Now, in that case, attorneys for the city are working right now to turn over hundreds of thousands of pieces of video and other documents to the Nichols family. All of those documents not related just to Tyre Nichols, but related to that pattern and practice lawsuit that's been filed against the city.
We're going to go
Pattern
back to
of
Fox
practice.
13's Kayla Solomon. She's back in the courtroom right now, or outside the courtroom, in fact. Kayla.
Yeah, you said it all there, that there was a seed of doubt that was planted by defense attorneys. I know a few months ago when we saw them in the federal trial, it seemed like some of the witnesses were all over the place. As I was sitting there watching it, it was sometimes hard to follow what they were saying, the points they were making. Some of the questions they were asking the witnesses were confusing, and you can tell that they spent these last few months prepping their witnesses. Some of them that they brought back were in the federal trial, but they also brought forth new witnesses. One interesting tidbit of information is that they called Preston Hemphill, one of the former Scorpion Unit team members who was there at the initial traffic stop. The defense called them as their witness. He did not testify on behalf of the state. They also called in the EMT Robert Long, who was on the scene treating Nichols the night that he was beaten. Now, we know at this point that the DA's office is planning to come out in about less than a minute. We just saw Hagerman come out. He walked out, and he at first said that he wanted to speak to the family before addressing us, which is, customary at this point. But right now we're waiting to see what he has to say. So I'm going to toss it back to you so that we can get into place and bring that to you live once Hagerman is ready to speak with us.
Okay.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you so much, Kayla. We're also waiting on our Fox 13 legal expert, Andre Wharton, will be here with us to really kind of go step by step on the charges that the officers were facing and the not guilty verdict for all 3 officers involved in this case.
all
Something that was
charges.
interesting that the defense attorneys continue to bring up was something called use of force continuum. It is a guideline for officers when it comes to use of force, depending on the severity of the subject's behavior, but also the level of resistance. They continue to focus on that with these 3 officers talking about the kind of force that was used against Tyre Nichols. It was not the same as Emmett Martin and the other officer, Desmond Mills.
That's right.
It's not the same.
They also brought in use of force experts to outline exactly how these officers were trained in accordance with MPD guidelines. And time again, when the defense, those experts made it clear that this is how these men were trained at the time, and that their response to Tyre Nichols was commensurate to his amount of resistance. Again, we refer back to the video that we have seen ad nauseum for the better part of 2 years. That video, to the layman, looks very, very different. And it's hard, I would imagine, for so many people to understand right now this verdict of not guilty on 7 counts against each officer.
So
Each
because he
officer
was able, hey, Big Pressure,
all 7
this
counts
is
against
what
them. And
you call
I think you're going
police
to hear
privilege.
some of
Yeah.
that, you will hear some
But
of
they
that,
say
I believe,
Chattanooga
when we
is
speak to the Tyre Nichols
pro-police.
family, but also understand that the Nichols family
But
is probably exhausted at this point.
This to me
sure
is
they have to
an
be.
illustration of what's
I
going to
actually
come
met Rovon
with this
Wells just a
executive
few
order
months ago, and she
and
said it was
immunity
exhausting
from
at that point.
police.
She said she was
If
tired.
they read
She said she wanted some justice for her
and
son,
a pro-police.
But she also said she just wanted it to be over and for it to not happen again.
This will only be
Here we are
acceptable
now,
to someone
2 years
who is
later.
not
They've gone through the
of
federal
their
trial.
race.
We have gone through the state trial. Again, all 3 officers have been
If that
acquitted
person
on
would have
all
been white,
counts. We're
it
talking
would
about
have been
the 7 major counts,
excessive
but
force.
even all of the lesser counts as well. They have been all acquitted of these charges. Now, mind you, there is still the civil trial that is left, and that is against the city of Memphis.
All right, let's go back to the courthouse. Paul Hagerman, Associate DA, about to address the media.
Oh, wow.
I want the trial team to thank me. So, we are obviously disappointed by
Very.
today's verdict. We respect the jury's decision, but we obviously strongly disagree with it. We, in good faith, brought this
Willie
case, and
Spencer.
I am convinced to this day that we had compelling evidence that showed that there was proof for every element of every one of the offenses that we charged. The jury took a different view. That is, of course, their right. That's the part of the decision. I want to start out by commending the trial team, Mr. Hagerman, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Headley, who did an excellent job. I wouldn't have done anything different. I thought they brought a compelling case to bear. I also want to commend the family of Tyre Nichols, who showed extraordinary grace and resilience through an incredible ordeal, an unimaginable ordeal. It's hard for me to understand, as I'm sure it's hard for the public to understand, or many in the public anyway, who watched that video, who heard the testimony, who heard the compelling arguments of trial counsel. It's hard for us to imagine how someone could say that none of the defendants were guilty of any of the charges. I think I personally think any fair-minded person who watches the video would come to the conclusion that everybody there had some responsibility for Tyre Nichols' death.
No, even
But as
no
I said,
assistance
The jury took a different
other
view.
than a
What I do
Smith
know is this.
for emergency.
Tyre Nichols is dead and deserves to be alive. And that is a tragedy. It's my hope that the public understands that this is part of the system and that our office will continue to push for accountability for everybody who violates the law, including,
The
if not
police.
especially, those who are sworn to uphold it.
What do you think what just didn't connect? What do you think it was? Was it the training? Was it the character witnesses? What do you think it was?
It's so hard to figure that out. It could be any number of a million things.
That
and
old
I
white
am
man.
disinclined to try to say, oh, we should have done this differently or
Robert
we should have done
Earl.
that differently, because I think the trial team did an excellent job. Obviously you had a situation where, arguably two of the more culpable defendants were not present. Then that allowed the remaining defendants to point the finger at others.
Oh, wow.
I personally think that when you take a look at all of the evidence, that shouldn't matter. Perhaps the jury took a different view. It's just impossible to say.
I know it's very early, but is this a case that you all are looking to retry?
I think it is too early for us to say that. I don't know what the grounds would be for that. We do have to accept the finality of a jury verdict in most cases.
Any thoughts about the jury being from Chattanooga and an all-white jury?
Obviously, people have mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's an issue. I'm not going to speculate about that.
Memphis is majority
I think
black.
It's a testimony to the fairness of our
Shit.
criminal justice system that we bent over backwards to get a jury from another jurisdiction to assure that the defendants were given
It shouldn't have
a
been
fair
Chattanooga.
trial. Beyond that, I don't think I should come.
Hell, it should have been Nashville over there. No, yeah.
It seems that the man had landed with the jury. You're securing a guilty plea for Emmett Martin. Can you talk a little more about his involvement?
Well, obviously, I think the proof speaks for itself, and Mr. Martin was, extremely involved and culpable, and played a key role in the unjustified death of Tyre Nichols. What's going to happen over at the federal court, and what will happen with his case remains to be seen.
What kind of conversation did you have with Tyre Nichols' family when they left today?
We spoke to them briefly. Obviously, they were devastated. I think you could imagine that they would be devastated. I think they were outraged, and I think we can understand why they'd be outraged by this result, given the evidence. They quite understandably decided that they needed to go home and process all this, and we're going to give them that respect and respect their privacy.
What sort of message does this give to specifically the Memphis Police Department, who just got done with this pattern and practice investigation and really doesn't have to grapple with the consequences of that either?
Right. So it's important to note that, there have been guilty verdicts over on the federal side. I'm not going to speculate about what will happen over on the federal side, but it's not like there have been no consequences whatsoever from the tragic killing of Tyre Nichols. I personally think that if we're going to make any sense of this tragedy, if we're going to have any silver lining from this dark cloud of both the event itself and, in my view, today's verdict, it has to be that we need to reaffirm our commitment to police reform and to doing what we need to do to make sure that tragedies like this don't happen again. And I remain committed to that. I'm sure the city of Memphis remains committed to that, and we're not giving up on that.
Are you surprised that they didn't? Because they could have gone for lesser charges than second-degree murder. What, 9 different charges they could have gotten, and they didn't even have to go to those. Did that surprise you?
Was I surprised that there wasn't a single guilty verdict on any of the counts or any of the lesser included offenses, given the overwhelming evidence that I think that we presented? Yes, I was surprised. Do I have an explanation for it? No.
How much did the state rely on the videos from that night, the Sky Cop video, the body cam videos? How much did you all rely on that as far as this trial goes?
Well, I mean, you saw the evidence. You saw the trial as well as I. I think it speaks for itself. Certainly the videos were a big part of the state's case, as they understandably would be. But I don't think the trial team relied entirely on the videos. I think they brought to bear witness testimony, very effective cross-examination of the defense witnesses, and some compelling opening and closing arguments.
But I think they should have brought up Haley's past when he worked for the state jail.
I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking about any of the decisions the trial team made. I think they did an excellent job. They're a credit to our office. You know, anybody who does any kind of jury trial work knows that you just can't predict what a jury will do. Them's the breaks, and it's a bitter pill to swallow, particularly in a case like this. But like I said, we can strongly disagree with the jury's verdict, but we nonetheless respect the jury.
Do you have any messages for people in the community who have had direct confrontations with not only the Scorpion team, but other police officers? There are federal lawsuits that are currently underway of people who have accused the Memphis Police Department of brutality. Do you have any message to them?
I guess my message to the community would be twofold. A, even if you were out there outraged by this verdict, please respond in a lawful, peaceful manner.
Comply.
Second, as I said earlier, with respect to any charge of violation of the law, including by those who are sworn to uphold it, we'll enforce the law. And just as we did aggressively in this case, we'll do that in any other case in which the facts and the law suggest that anybody in the law enforcement community or anybody else has violated the law and used excessive force.
Does Mr. Hagerman or Headley or Johnson have any comment about
please.
y'all tried the case?
We tried real hard. We fought real hard in there. We knew this was always going to be difficult. As D.A. Mulroy said, we're trying the 3 least culpable in terms of, obviously, Mr. Martin was the primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. Mr. Mills, with the baton strikes, again, a primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. So we knew this trial would be hard. I think y'all saw us fight in there. We did the best we could, and the family, they've been great through this. Today's heartbreaking to them, but they've been with us fighting.
What is it like for you all to go through all of this and looking at the video and talking with the family and definitely expecting something else?
It's disappointing. It's heartbreaking. You try cases. It's a business of trying cases, though. Okay? There's always risk and there's reward, but we keep on going and we try to get justice. And I think we tried hard in there this week to get justice. I know the family was behind us, and we didn't get the result we wanted or they wanted, but they've thought about Tyrie obviously a lot this week, and they're thinking about Tyrie now. And
Melanie, Tanisha,
Was there any bit of evidence that was presented over the last week and a half, or any argument made by the defense that felt particularly salient to you guys that you kind of were like, this kind of sucks to deal with and try and move around?
I don't think we can at this point sort of, like I said, Monday morning quarterback or think retroactively about this or that. This blow was particularly powerful. That one was particularly powerful. I think structurally, as Mr. Hagerman has already mentioned, the 2 defendants who were most
the defense came across
weren't present in the courtroom.
Heavy blow.
Right? That doesn't mean that the remaining 3 defendants weren't culpable. You heard our arguments in there about criminal responsibility, people being responsible for the acts of another, the duty to intervene, the duty to take affirmative steps at what was clearly, a person being beaten to death. That was a structural part of the trial that was a challenge for the trial team. Other than that, I think it's hard to identify any one thing, and it's hard to get inside the mind of the jury.
This verdict, is this going to affect Emmett Martin's plea deal at all, or any sentence he may receive when he does plead guilty?
That's up to the federal court. You know, we really can't speculate on
What
that.
about on the state level?
Well, I think we're not really prepared to talk about that just yet, because what we're doing is we're waiting to see what happens over with the federal sentencing. And once we see what happens with the federal sentencing, we'll have a better idea of what we want to do with that case.
And my last question about the jury, because obviously the jury made the decision, but those who don't understand the process, I know you all want an unbiased jury, but why Chattanooga? Where did that come from as far as that jurisdiction?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a motion filed to defense to change venue, and there was a study done of the amount of publicity in the various large cities in Tennessee, and it was found that Chattanooga had the lowest amount of pretrial publicity with regard to this case, and so that's why it was chosen.
All right. Thank you all very much.
That is Fox 13's that is District Attorney Steve Mulroy right there. You were hearing also Assistant DA Paul Hagerman speaking in reference to how they perceive the outcome of this trial, of the verdict. Again, all three former officers, Tadarius being Demetrius Haley, and of course Justin Smith, they were all acquitted on all of the charges.
On all 7 counts.
All of them, even the lesser charges.
Total of 21 filed against 3 men in this case. But I think it's an important perspective to keep in mind. You heard Paul Hagerman say it. You heard Steve Mulroy say it a few times throughout their brief remarks there. Keep in mind, these were 3 of the 5 officers charged, and it was Paul Hagerman who called them the 3 least culpable of the 5. Keep in mind, Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills have already taken plea deals with the state. They've already been found guilty at the federal level, as have other officers in this particular case. So I think it is very important to keep it in perspective that there will be punishment for the death of Tyre Nichols. No one is walking scot-free in this particular instance. And I think the most poignant thing that Steve Mulroy said were very close to the top of his remarks when he said it's hard to understand how someone could say that they were not guilty of those charges after looking at that video. It's very hard for him to understand, and I think that's probably a sentiment that's shared throughout the Memphis community, not to all of those who've watched this case.
I think also because when we saw the video, the immediate conclusion was that every person that was there held some sort of responsibility for the fact that this young man lost his life. But again, in this case, these 3 officers, this jury out of Hamilton County, their actions, their behavior that night, this jury felt that it was exactly police policy. It was nothing out of the ordinary. It was not to be considered excessive. It was under protocol. Even though for the rest of us that saw the video, again, we may have seen things a little bit differently. But as I said earlier, the video was slowed down second by second for these jurors. So they saw every strike, every move, every hit, every punch, every kick. They saw it all in that format. We didn't see it that way. But to the naked eye, it felt like this verdict was going to be a little bit different. But it wasn't today.
And of the 7 counts, I think that I'm most surprised that charges 6 and 7 didn't stick on someone. Because charge 6, official misconduct, refraining from performing duty.
That one too.
Basically, I did nothing to help. You know, you have a duty as an officer to help someone in need, and also official oppression. It's hard to watch the video and watch them even in the aftermath of the beating. The video we've seen time and time again just over the past few minutes of those officers circling a Tyre Nichols who's laying on the ground, helpless. It's hard to see that video and not see that as oppressive. But in the eyes of the law, in this particular case, according to the jury, not guilty on all 7 counts. And we should say we did get a statement from the attorneys Ben Crump and Antonio Ramanucci. They reacted to the verdict. There it is right there, but we're going to read part of it. It says, Today's verdicts are a devastating miscarriage of justice. The world watches Tyre Nichols was beaten to death by those sworn to protect and serve. That brutal, inhumane assault was captured on video, yet the officers responsible were acquitted.
Tyre's life was stolen, and his family was denied the justice they so deeply deserved. We were outraged, and we know we are not alone. We thank the Memphis community, people across the nation who have stood by Tyre's family, lifted their voices and demanded accountability.
And we're going to have this entire statement posted on our website. It wraps up and in summary says, let this be a rallying cry. We must comfort the broken systems in this particular case.
We're going to go back
Rodney
to
King all over again. I hate to
who
say
has
that.
been in this courtroom from the very beginning of this case. She joins us again. Kayla.
Yeah, Daryl briefly touched on it, that it was shocking to him that, of course, official misconduct as well as official oppression, they were also found not guilty of those two charges. And one of those simply had to do with stepping in and refraining from giving any help to Tyrie after it was clear that he was beaten. Now, we know at this point that one of the witnesses that the defense called was EMT Robert Long. He was on scene that night. He was called to the scene and was initially told that Tyrie had been pepper sprayed and tased and was able to get away from officers. But he admitted that he was waiting for the person that was his superior on the scene, the advanced EMT, to step up and tell him what to do. But he also admitted that he witnessed Tyrie's condition deteriorate the longer they were out on the scene. And I think the timing that they gave us was, it was about 19 minutes from the time that he initially got to the scene and was told to respond to Nichols, from the time that Nichols was actually put into an ambulance and taken to St. Francis Hospital. Now, of course, in case you missed that verdict, we do have a piece of that here for you to watch live. Take a listen.
Count 1, second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tadarius Bean, not guilty. Count 1. We, the jury, find the defendant, Demetrius Haley, not guilty. Count 1.
They better leave Memphis and go live in Chattanooga.
Not guilty.
And of course, that count 1 that he referenced there is for that second-degree murder charge. And per Tennessee law, if you do not think that something fits the bill for second-degree murder, you're allowed to consider about 9 lesser charges. Now, in this case, those lesser charges included voluntary manslaughter, as well as reckless homicide and criminally negligent homicide. You could also consider aggravated assault resulting in death and aggravated assault resulting in injury. And in this case, the jury felt that that was not something that was fit. Now, we also know the fact that the defendants were in court as this was read. Now, of course, their back was facing where I was sitting, so I couldn't see their faces and their reactions initially, but you could see that their attorneys were standing right next to them, and there was a deep sigh of relief coming from them, as well as their attorneys, as well as their families. And as I mentioned before, we heard the families of these defendants. As soon as they left the courtroom, they were saying, "Thank you, Jesus," and they were embracing, and they were very happy that their family members were acquitted. But again, they're not completely off the hook. They still do have to face the federal charges that they were all found guilty of. We know Demetrius Haley was found guilty of obstruction of justice, as well as Bean and Smith, but Haley was also found guilty of excessive force resulting in bodily injury from the kick that he administered. That was one of the main focal points that we saw in the federal trial, as well as in this trial. But his attorneys were able to tell the jury multiple times that that kick was not to the head of Tyre Nichols, that in fact it was to his body. And the reason they gave was that Haley decided to kick in order to make Nichols give his arm to Smith and Bean so that he could properly be handcuffed. And of course, that testimony resonated with the jury.
Kayla, I know you've been in the courtroom again from the very beginning, and we were talking earlier that that was one of the main points by the defense attorneys. They continued to stress the impact of Emmett Martin, of course, Desmond Mills, that it was their kicks, their punches. That is what really led to the death of Tyre Nichols. And the 3 other officers were simply just trying to contain Nichols, in a sense.
Yeah, and during his closing arguments yesterday, Stephen Loeffler, one of the attorneys for Demetrius Haley, actually was effective. He gave timestamps of how at the initial traffic stop when Haley was there, he had just been sprayed with pepper spray in his eyes, and he was still at the scene of that initial traffic stop when Martin, Bean, and Smith were trying to get Nichols into handcuffs. He went through timestamp by timestamp saying that it was at this time that Martin administered a kick, that he administered a punch, that he administered another kick. And this all happened before Haley even got to the scene. But then there was also video shown from the Sky Cop that shows that the second Haley did get to the scene, he made a comment that had an expletive in it. And when he hopped out the car, he did kick Nichols, according to his defense attorneys, in the arm to try to make sure that he could be put into handcuffs. But again, that seemed to resonate with the jury.
You know, Kayla, Steve Mulroy isn't one to show emotion, but he seemed visibly disturbed by this decision.
Yeah, and you can see it in the courtroom, actually. As soon as the verdict was read, I did have a direct line of sight to DA Mulroy, and you could see that the emotion had flushed from his face after we got about halfway through the verdict being read. And of course, it took a while for that full verdict because we're talking 21 charges total, 7 charges per defendant, so that's 21 charges. It took a while for all of it to be read, and you could see Mulroy's face lose emotion as it was being read completely by Judge Jones.
Let's replay right now.
We are obviously disappointed by today's verdict. We respect the jury's decision, but we obviously strongly disagree with it. We, in good faith, brought this case, and I am convinced to this day that we had compelling evidence that showed that there was proof for every element of every one of the offenses that we charged. The jury took a different view. That is, of course, their right. That's the part of the decision.
Yeah, you heard it there, but you also did hear, we heard from Deputy District Attorney Paul Hagerman, who was the lead prosecutor on this case. He talked about where that jury came from and why Hamilton County in particular was chosen. Don't know how much of it you heard, but the explanation that he gave was that it's one of the counties in Tennessee that received the least amount of publicity when it came to the Tyre Nichols case, and that ultimately is where they decided to choose the jury from, of course, after the judge gave them the go-ahead to go and to get that outside jury to come here to Shelby County.
Kayla, I do have a question for you that's always very interesting. We know every court case, someone wins and someone always loses. But before that verdict was read,
hey, Victoria,
was there a feeling inside the courtroom on which way this case was going to go?
Now, just for perspective, when that federal case happened, it took about 3 weeks. We had a verdict in a matter of 5.5 hours. It took less than 6 hours. They went to deliberate by 10, and by about 4:30, we knew that there was a verdict that had been reached. And in a situation like that, you don't really know what to expect when a verdict is reached that quickly. Now, in this case, of course, they began deliberating just after 12:30 yesterday. And the longer time goes on, the more you start to think of what the possible outcomes can be. So again, it took about 8 hours in total between yesterday and today for deliberations. It's fair to say that none of us really knew how this was going. We knew that the lesser charges were in play. We also knew that there were 7 charges that these men faced at this level, and on the federal level, it was 4 charges each. So we didn't really know what was going on. I saw the family a couple times, the family of Tyre Nichols. They were pacing in the hallway throughout the day. They just kept saying that they didn't want to sit still. They were getting antsy. So that kind of was the feeling that really all of us had as we were waiting to get the final signal that there was a verdict today.
I'm anxious for everyone waiting to hear what happens. That is Fox 13's Kegel Solomon reporting. Something that came from District Attorney Steve Mulroy. He said that they are disappointed in this verdict of not guilty for all of these officers, the 3 officers involved. But at this point, we have to respect the jury.
Now, no recourse after this. This is pretty much the end of the road on the state level. But again, the federal trial in the past were awaiting federal sentencing, and they were going to wait on federal sentencing until after this verdict was handed up to the judge. And here's what we got as we recap. Demetrius Haley, Tadarius Bean, Justin Smith found not guilty.
No
each
duty
man
to
found
intervene.
not guilty on all
oh my
7
God.
charges. So each man acquitted on all the charges against them. Again, as far as the jury, we've talked a little about the jury. From Hamilton County, Tennessee, Chattanooga, you heard Paul Hagerman say it. Kayla reiterated it just a moment ago. They went to Hamilton County because after doing research, they found that that was the least saturated market with the news of Tyre Nichols' death and the ongoing coverage of his death and the later ensuing trials and such. So that's where they went. They thought they would find the most impartial jurors from that county. This is after the defense filed a motion, I should say, to have an outside jury come in for this trial. 8 white women, 4 white men, and 2 alternates. A white woman and a man. The alternates were dismissed yesterday just as they began deliberations. So a jury of 12 finding all 3, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith, not guilty in this particular case. But again, I want to reiterate, this does not mean that justice has not been served in some way, because as Paul Hagerman and Steve Mulroy pointed out, 2 of these officers already caught the plea deals on both the federal charges and state charges against them. Both Ernest Martin and Desmond Mills are still in jail right now, waiting to be sentenced federally. And after this plays out, they will go through the sentencing process, the formal sentencing process at the state level as well. So there will be some repercussions for these officers moving forward, because all 3 of these, the ones that were tried today and found not guilty, also found guilty in some way, form, or fashion on the federal level back in the fall, and they will wait to hear their fate on those federal charges here in the next few months.
Again, District Attorney Steve Mulroy, he said anyone would have come to the conclusion that the officers were all responsible.
My heart goes out to the Nichols family.
Many of the
We
reporters
felt
said that he
you.
was
I
frustrated,
mean, ready, man.
and definitely disappointed. We're going to listen in again to
Very
Steve Mulroy.
disappointing.
So we are obviously disappointed by today's verdict. We respect the jury's
police failed
decision,
them,
but we obviously
and
strongly
the
disagree with it.
jury of
We, in
his
good
peers
faith, brought
failed them.
this case, and I am convinced to this day that we had compelling evidence that showed that there was proof for every element of every one of the offenses that we charged. The jury took a different view. That is, of course, their right. That's the part of the decision. Even if you were out there outraged by this verdict, please respond in a lawful, peaceful manner.
Because they're going to beat your ass.
Second, as I said earlier,
from Tina Fey and
they're going to beat your ass and get away with it.
Girls.
Okay?
Hilarious hit Broadway music.
They are going to beat you to F.
just as we did aggressively
and get away
in this
with
case,
it.
we'll do that in any other case in which the facts and the law suggest that anybody in the law enforcement community or anybody else
And that's
has
a
violated
fact.
the law and used excessive force. It's hard for me to understand, as I'm sure it's hard for the public to understand, or many in the public anyway, who watched that video, who heard the testimony, who heard the compelling arguments of trial counsel. It's hard for us to imagine how someone could say that none of the defendants were guilty of any of the charges. I personally think any fair-minded person who watches the video would come to the conclusion that everybody there had some responsibility for Tyre Nichols' death.
And I think that's an overriding sentiment by most of the
Absolutely.
people watching us tonight.
One of the attorneys, the district attorneys, was Tanisha Johnson, and I believe that she kept stressing in court that no one said stop.
Yeah.
No one said this is too much. No one said, okay, we've gone too far. She continued to stress that to the jury. But in this case, again, this jury of 8 women, 4 men, they looked at this same video, and the work of these officers, the actions of these officers, they felt it fell under what Memphis police officers are allowed to do. It felt like it fell under their protocol as far as being an officer.
And just keep in mind that the burden is always on the prosecution in these particular instances. The defense, all they really have to do is sow reasonable doubt into the minds of that jury. Really, in many cases, it only takes in the minds of one juror. But today, given the fact that they deliberated for just over 8 hours, spread over 2 half days, it was pretty clear that the defense did a very good job in sowing those seeds of doubt in the jury.
Clearly compelling.
That these men were guilty of, the most egregious charge, second-degree murder, all the way down to official oppression, which was count number 7. And I'll reiterate that I think a lot of people are shocked that at least count 6 and 7 weren't moving in the favor of the prosecution. Count 6, of course, official misconduct, refraining from performing duty, and official oppression. But again, all 3 found not guilty on the 7 counts against each.
And all of the lesser charges as well.
That's right.
But of course, we know these officers, they still have to get through the federal sentencing, which is coming up, and we will see what happens from there.
And after this, we have another trial, the civil trial. Of course, the date not set in stone yet, but that is forthcoming very quickly. The family of Tyre Nichols is suing the city of Memphis for $550 million. There's a lot at play in that. If you go back and in some of the research that I did, it's a very simple research. It was a Google search. You'll remember the family of George Brown sued, and I'm sorry, George Floyd. Forgive me. The family of George Floyd sued, and they blew suit for just over $500 million, $500 million, and they settled with the city for $34 million. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out too. As far as the city of Memphis, because a $550 million loss, as has been stated time and time again, from the mayor's office all the way down through the city council, would bankrupt this city. So that is forthcoming. So I'm sad to say that the family of Tyre Nichols, as you said, Miss Wells, as you said earlier, has already said how exhausting this has been for her. They still have one more step to take to seek justice and find some closure after the death of their son, Tyre Nichols.
Again, we have had a couple of reporters downtown at 201 Poplar today for this case. We have been talking to Kayla Solomon, but we also have Fox 13's Jack Guiilty. Jack.
Yeah, good evening, guys. You know, folks cleared out quick. We saw the family taken into a side room there outside the courtroom. They were very sullen looking. They met with some of the prosecutors in there for a few minutes and then eventually left out through a back way. You
I
heard the
know
DA
she's
say
devastated.
that they've got a lot to
my
process here.
God.
We actually just spoke with Kareem Ali, who's with the family and with the Crump Law Office. He told us that they were devastated. Said there's a possibility they're going to speak on this at some point, but that they need time to get home and kind of process things. Now, we just got here outside 201 Poplar. You can see, you know, some of the media cars here lined up outside just to show you the huge national attention this got. And some officers were actually just walked into that parking garage and cleared out. That was the other thing. It wasn't just Tyre Nichols' family that got out of here immediately. It was those defendants, the 3 former officers, and their families. We actually never saw those 3 former officers leave the courtroom through kind of the public side of things. There must have been some sort of back stairway that they went down. We did see some of those family members of them, though, walking out. A lot of cheering. One woman kept yelling hallelujah while they were getting in the elevators. But those defense attorneys, the defendants, pretty much kept out of the public eye as soon as that verdict came down. Daryl and Darcy?
Jack, I know when you were inside the courthouse just a little bit ago, you were pointing out the fact that Shelby County Sheriff's deputies, of course, they're the ones who run Shelby County Courthouse there, were really starting to show up in mass. They had a pretty significant presence. I've talked to several police officers here over just the last little bit, several sources within the MPD. I know that they are now on their level 3 alert. That's level 3 out of level 4. What are you seeing any increased police presence there around the courthouse from the MPD? I know that the guys on the streets are hoping that everything stays quiet, but they're prepared if it doesn't.
Daryl, you know, I can tell you there was a lot of emotion inside. Many activists have gotten really close with the family, and we saw them crying when they walked out. That large amount of deputies that were situated outside the courtroom, they actually cleared out not long after DA Mulroy started talking. I think by that point, the defendants, Nichols' family had all cleared out, and there was no need for that increased presence inside the building. Not seeing really anyone on guard out here. I can see down the street there is a police car, but it looks to just be a typical traffic stop. But of course, you know, a lot of people are highly emotional surrounding this case. So that level 3 standby, I mean, you can absolutely understand why they'd want to do that. You know, people were invested in this, and, you know, frankly, a lot of folks are shocked by the way that verdict came out.
Fox 13's Jack Guiilty reporting live downtown tonight. Thank you so much, Jack.
All right, we have our legal analyst, Attorney Andre Wharton. He's joining us by phone from his office in Midtown. Andre, let's cut right to it. Your thoughts?
Hey, tough verdict, but I'm not totally surprised. The reason I say that because I know each of the defendants had competent counsel, very capable counsel, but you celebrate justice when it occurs, and you have to just be patient about things and let things play out. But obviously, I'm sure defense counsel and their clients are extremely pleased with the jury's verdict. I know there are a lot of shocked people on the side of of course, the Nichols family and the community. But I would urge, as many of you all have been talking about already, urge caution in terms of folks reacting. And just, we let the justice system play out, and the jury has spoken. But I was shocked, but in some sense, but not necessarily, because it's a tough case. The charges are homicide on down, and there are a lot of different dynamics that went into, I'm sure, this jury's verdict. And so I'm somewhat surprised, but I'm not totally, I must say.
I think we're a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, Andre. These three officers, Bean, Haley, and of course Smith, all of them got a not guilty verdict on every single count. On every single count, even the lesser charges. As an attorney yourself, is there anything else the state could have done? Or is there something they didn't do and should have done?
It's hard to second guess the prosecution of the case. I know the three prosecutors on the case are very seasoned prosecutors. They're passionate about their job. I think they believed in their case. But let's face it, these are law enforcement officers. And although it's not written in the law,
Hey, Travis.
You cannot discount the fact that law enforcement, generally speaking, people like to consider law enforcement to be the good guys, if you will. You remember back in the day, at least when I was young, they called the officers officer friendly. A lot of people remember that, and the notion that officers don't come to work just to do bad things. And I think you cannot discount the fact that these officers were conducting a traffic stop, and at least the arguments were made that Mr. Nichols ran from the police and that he resisted. And so, regardless of whether it's written in the law or not, there's some school of thought that officers will get a presumption that they were doing their best with a difficult set of circumstances. And I think that was emphasized during this trial. So regardless of how strongly the case is prosecuted, how passionately they are, how much the law is, in writing, in theory, on your side, and how bad things look on a video, you cannot discount the fact that human beings, in many instances, depending on their perspectives on life, want to give the officers, quote unquote, the benefit of the doubt. And let's face it, the law says, generally speaking, defendants are presumed innocent, and until the prosecution proves a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So in this instance, maybe unlike some other defendants who are being prosecuted, the officers truly got the benefit of the doubt. And so you cannot discount that fact that the defendants, who they were, they're law enforcement officers.
And Andre, not trying to give the prosecution a hall pass here, but I think Paul Hagerman really summed it up best when he said in this particular case, they were trying the three least culpable officers out of the five. The other two, Desmond Mills and Emmett Martin, have already, taken plea deals. So these were the three least culpable. Again, in the words of Hagerman, how hard of a road was that to travel for the prosecution, considering that fact?
Well, it's very difficult, because what they had to do under these facts is to really assert this theory of criminal responsibility. And that is, hey, look, they were out there. They had a duty to speak up, to intervene, to do something other than just watch, make comments, or use some kind of physical contact. Whatever the theory they were going as to these three defendants, I think it's significant that two of the individuals who were more culpable or most culpable out of the five have already pled guilty and and face some accountability. And so I think the fact that the jury was likely made aware of that, because I believe someone cooperated, one of the defendants, I think that had to weigh into it, because you run the risk of the jury looking at this and say, hey, look, they got the culpable guys. These other guys are just doing their job. It's already a tough job, as I just indicated. That argument is out there. And so if you're looking at it that way, they say, look, we're not letting everybody off. The guys who were most responsible have already accepted responsibility. These guys were doing a tough job. I'm not going to find them guilty of anything. And I think you saw that in their verdict. It was from the top down. No lesser included, no official misconduct, official oppression. I think what you saw there was a response to, hey, look,
I think I would have preferred a mistrial.
Here?
And let's start over.
Charged? It's a tough job they do. I'm just not going to find them guilty.
Then they're not guilty.
Andre, is that because
and unable to
just
be
thinking,
charged
is that because
again?
Emmett Martin and Desmond Mills, for the most part, they weren't in the courtroom, so the jury only saw the three least culpable in this case?
Yeah. Those other two gentlemen were not on trial, and so it's not like they were sitting there next to him and the perception is, hey, look, you were all in it together. And so it's easy to kind of raise, it's not easy, but it can be more effective to raise the empty chair. Hey, look, the chairs that are empty here, if you will, are for the guys who are not here, who are the guilty ones. That's the responsibility. That's who shares responsibility, who possesses the sole responsibility for this, not these defendants that are in front of you. And so
it's not true when you look at the video.
For the defendants to make in this case, and I think they made it.
But I think.
That is Fox 13 legal expert Andre Wharton joining us today. Thank you so much for your input, Andre.
I think, in my opinion, what the defense, what the prosecutor thought was going to work in their favor as far as the prejudice. All white jury will probably send these all black corrupt police to prison, find them guilty, all white versus all black. I think it backfired with Trump's executive order, his mindset about police can do no wrong and they are all should be entitled to immunity. I think that part of it backfired on their thinking, Chattanooga all white, because thinking that if they would have had a bunch of black people on the jury, black people wouldn't have sent them to jail. That's what I think right now.
Fox 13's Kayla Solomon, she's still live at 201 Poplar as she gives her final thoughts on this afternoon's verdict. Again, not guilty against all three former MPD
I'm just too outdone.
Yeah, Daryl and Darcy, this is a culmination of something that's lasted 9 days. We started here on Monday, April 28th. We went all the way through 6 days straight, including Saturday, and then we were here Monday, Tuesday, and now today. Now, some of the things that stick out to me are some of the people we heard testimony from. We heard Tyrie's mom get on the stand herself. She was the very first witness. She recounted the last conversation that she had with her son when she told him she was making sesame chicken for dinner. And of course, she said she was expecting to see him home for dinner to enjoy that meal, and he never made it home. He ended up getting into this encounter with the 5 former Memphis police officers just feet away from their home. Now, we do know that we've gotten multiple statements since then. You heard from the district attorney's office saying that, of course, they were not happy with today's verdict, but they respected it because, of course, it was a jury that decided the fate of these 3 former officers. Now, whether the jury did decide that these 3 were the least culpable, that remains to be unseen. Of course, we can't be in direct contact with the jury at this point, but of course, the question here is, what will those federal sentences be? All 3 of them have been found guilty of at least 1 federal charge of obstruction of justice, and we know that sentencing is set to happen next month, actually, in June. So we do
They
know
had
that
one
they will be
token
held
that
accountable to
was
some extent.
extra.
I did ask DA Mulroy
It
if
wasn't
at this
chosen.
point they're planning to potentially retry the case, and he says no, that the burden is very low for that, or the burden is very high for that, and that happens in very, other cases, very unique cases. So at this point, we do know that this is the verdict that we're going to have to deal with, at least at the state level, and it'll be interesting to see how the city reacts, of course, how the police department reacts, how the mayor reacts, and even then the family of Tyre Nichols, how they will react to the federal sentencing that is coming up here this summer.
And it's Fox 13's Kayla Solomon live downtown tonight. Thank you so much, Kayla. You know what I've found that's been very interesting? We have seen other cases of police brutality and violence in other communities across the country. We've also seen the reaction after the verdict is read. In this case, it's been very quiet in this community. And I just wonder if it has to do with Tyre Nichols' mother, Ravon Wells, who said after the federal trial, stay calm, community.
Because if they beat your head in, they're going to get out.
She has a very important voice, and she has used her voice very
So don't do it.
throughout this process. Again,
I'll let resistant. I don't have to get out the car. You can't tell me what to do. Don't touch me.
Mulroy said she shows extraordinary grace.
Yep.
She truly does.
She really does. So again, just in summary, what we've seen this afternoon, just before 2 o'clock, the verdict was handed up to the judge. All 3 officers on trial for the death of Tyre Nichols found not guilty on 7 counts each.
And that also includes every lesser charge. So 21 charges they face, but all of them have been acquitted on every single charge in this case.
At the state level.
At the state level, of course. But of course, we have 2 reporters downtown. We will have a full story for you coming up tonight on Fox 13 News at 5, 6, 9, and of course 10. And everything, of course, is on our website as well. So continue to follow us.
And that's coming up, Fox 13 News at 5, an hour and 43 minutes from now. We'll see you then.
Let me see if, oh boy.
Not just the 7 charges, but none of the lesser charges were even considered as a guilty, it seemed like to him. He also mentioned when he spoke to Tyree's mother, Tyree's family, how they were devastated and just needed to go home and kind of be alone and decompress from this. Take you a little bit back to some of the other things that he mentioned. One of the other hot points has been the jury selection and then the makeup of the jury. When asked about the jury, he did say that why it came from Chattanooga, that it was primarily because of the lack of media attention. We're going to continue our team coverage now.
For those of us with service animals, preparation is key. Ensure your buddy...
Of course, we're right here. I want to take this out for just a second. We're live off Washington Avenue. As you can see, there's not a lot going on here right now. I think one of the assumptions was that there was going to be a gathering of people outside of 201 after the verdict was read inside on the 5th floor, of course. That is not the case. I did just recently speak with one person who's been following this trial, who has likely been inside of this courtroom for the last 9 days, watching close with Tyre Nichols' family, as I understand, and he's incredibly disappointed as to what happened today as far as the verdict goes. He does not believe there was justice in this particular trial. But again, no sign of really anyone except for Tadarius Bean was being escorted down Washington Avenue by multiple Shelby County Sheriff deputies. A short time ago, right when I arrived here, I was not able to talk to him or anybody associated with Tadarius Bean. But again, I'm going to step out of the way for just a second so you can see what's going on here. Really nothing, just some folks exiting the door, obviously inside court. But again, you know, a lot of people are talking about the jury who came from Hamilton County, an all-white jury, and that's one of the things that a couple of people that were talking to me specifically referenced, and they didn't understand why that was the case in this particular trial. So really mainly uneventful down here outside, but we're going to continue to try and talk to people as they exit 201.
No justice, no peace.
Thank you for that. So
Otis Sanford, political analyst here for ABC 24, joining us now. Otis, I just want your initial thoughts and just reactions from today's outcome.
Well, I have two sort of extreme reactions. One is I'm not surprised that the worst charges, the murder charges, they were found not guilty. I'm not surprised by that. It seems to me that the ones who did the most in terms of causing Tyre Nichols' death are the ones who pled guilty to the charge. So I'm not surprised by that. I am surprised that none of the lesser charges, oppression and failing to follow procedure and things like that, I am surprised that there were no guilty verdicts on any of those, and it doesn't seem like the jury even considered that. That's my initial reaction. But I think I said before that I'm just not convinced that the prosecution put on enough proof. They had 5 witnesses. They didn't have anybody from the police department that I heard that talked about policies and procedures, which was part of the defense. And so I'm just surprised I was surprised by the lack of a robust prosecution here when the defense brought in at least 17 witnesses. And of course you have what appears to be a police-friendly jury here. Those are my initial reactions.
Yeah, you're echoing a lot of the same notes that Pastor Fisher had here.
I stole his notes. And I didn't. I stole his notes and I beat him here. And I was driving, didn't hear it, so I didn't steal his.
No, for sure. One of the things that District Attorney Mulroy said was the fact that they felt like they did everything they could have. He couldn't really think back, and he wasn't going to take it there. Essentially, just what they should or shouldn't have done. What do you think about his reaction coming out of the courtroom? And he is, proud of his team. They've worked hard. Clearly.
Well, yeah, I heard some of that when I was preparing to come down. That's what you expect. I mean, he's not going to get out there and trash his team. These are experienced prosecutors. Mr. Hagerman is very experienced, so he's not going to do that. But I just say again that the stakes were really high here, and I think you put on more proof than you need and overwhelm the jury as much as you can. Yes, there was video, and it was very compelling video. But the video alone, because of the nighttime and you really can't see who did what to whom in some of the respects, you needed more than just the video to prove the top level cases. And when we talk about the lesser charges, you needed someone to clearly explain, someone from the police department, to clearly explain, no, this was not procedure. No, you are not supposed to treat people this way and hold them this way and then misstate what you did. Those are violations, and those were part of the lesser charges. So while I expect that D.A. Mulroy, I expected him to say what he said, I'm just not sure that the public is going to buy all of it, honestly.
Yeah, Pepper, to Otis's point, I study, my PhD is in rhetoric and communication from the University of Memphis. I'm sure Otis appreciates
good old U of it.
Right, and one of the things we learn about is what's called epidictic or ceremonial rhetoric. So what do we expect Mulroy to say?
Exactly.
He's not going to get up there and say that his team put on a mediocre defense or lacked zeal or was not thorough. Who knows what he might say behind closed doors? Who knows how much influence he had on whatever kind of defense was put together? Same is true, or the point that I'm trying to make regarding C.J. Davis. Was it simply ceremonial rhetoric when she stood in front of hundreds of millions of people on national news outlets and said they violated policy, they did not follow their training? There is a gap between what came out in this trial and what came out of Chief Davis's mouth, which says someone must be lying. And we, the general public, would hope that that truth would come out during the trial. It didn't come out during the trial.
Oh no, because she wanted her job. She got her job back
before, insofar as what the fundamental truth is. And so what do people expect the general public to feel except for a level of skepticism, because we know if I or Otis were on trial, chances are that prosecution.
Oh, Lord, I'm sorry.
Chances are that prosecution would have been a lot more thorough, comprehensive, and aggressive. They say it's better to have something and not need it than to need it and not have it. They clearly needed much more evidence and did not have it.
And go ahead.
Oh, I agree with that 100%. And to the point with Chief C.J. Davis, and I don't understand why she wasn't called as a witness.
And that was one topic
I don't
discussed as well.
Yeah, I don't understand that. Because the prosecution, their job is to prosecute. And they can't worry about anything else. And if there was a fear that, or there was some concern that, well, she really can't testify because the civil case is hanging over their head, that's not the prosecution's problem. The prosecution is there to prosecute the charges that they filed.
Right.
When you file those charges, you were telling the public, I have the evidence to sustain those charges. And now we see that if they had it, they didn't present it. And I just think, again, that either C.J. Davis or one of her chief top people should have been on that witness stand talking about policies and procedures and violation of procedures, because that went to the heart of the defense.
So, do you have any insight as to why that didn't happen? Why she wasn't called to that?
I have none. I mean, my sources are from many years ago in the police department, so I don't have them. I can only surmise that maybe she was hesitant to testify, or somebody higher up in the police department was hesitant to testify because of the civil case, and they don't want to admit some liability that then they would have to show in the civil case. But again,
Brother Otis,
that doesn't have anything to do with this case.
And Brother Otis, a Google search will show you what she said.
Absolutely.
So it's not like they are asking her to present testimony that is not already in the public record.
I agree with it.
So here's what, since we can't speculate just a little bit, and so I'm conceding that I'm speculating this, but I think there is enough precedent historically to validate what I'm trying to say, that there is a collusion, and I don't mean that in the worst sense, but a collusion between these different factions of law enforcement. So you have the DA's office, you have the Memphis Police Department, you have other law enforcement agencies and entities, and they know they must work together. And so if you put on as robust and comprehensive and thorough as a defense as you need to, all of a sudden you have hung the culture of policing out to dry. You've laid it bare, which is something an advocate like me is praying for and begging for and pushing for. Whatever it is, as ugly and as heinous as it is, let's deal with it. We had an opportunity to deal with it. They chose not to. This is my argument. They would have to prove me wrong. They chose not to. And in doing so, you now placed an unrealistic burden on a jury that is not from the area, doesn't understand the culture. Most of them have probably never experienced what people like Tyre Nichols or black folks in Memphis and Shelby County experience from police. And now they don't have the consciousness to sift through what they seen and what they heard, coupled with the instructions that are given from, because most of us don't speak legalese. Most of us don't know some of the ins and outs of law and what you can and cannot do. Most of them, I don't even know, and I bet you in weeks or years, when they start interviewing, you know, they say juror B or something like that. Juror B is going to say, I didn't know I could have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And so now we have to wait on that. So again, I disagree with Otis 1,000% here. It's a missed opportunity because there was not enough righteous, robust, relevant evidence that was presented that would have made this as much of a no-brainer as some of us who feel like we know a little bit more just clearly see this as.
So well, I'm not going to, very briefly.
Go ahead.
I wouldn't use, and I understand how you phrase that. I'm not going to use the word collusion.
Yeah, you can give me a better
word. That's Earl's word, not mine.
Yeah.
But I do get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Because the factions here do have to work together on other cases and down the road. And you are absolutely right about the makeup of the jury and their lived experiences. I mean, when you pick a jury, you are expecting that jury to bring their lived experiences to the case. It happens all the time. I covered hundreds of trials back in the 70s and 80s as a reporter. And you can't dismiss your lived experiences. And so that's part of this case as well. That, to Earl's point, it is incumbent then upon the prosecution to cut through and get to your lived experiences and help them understand what happened here and why it was a crime and why they should be convicted. And I think that's where they fell short.
So with that said, where does this put the public's trust in not only MPD, but then all of the local agencies that are then working with MPD?
I think this echoes the skepticism and the sentiment that people have been expressing. Read the DOJ report, and you will see how much distrust, and I say warranted distrust, exists amongst the citizens in the community. And again, this is why certain people don't come forward. There are several people who have said that they have experienced similar things from the Scorpion unit or the Memphis gang unit and other units, but they don't feel like they should come forward because they don't believe that they would get justice. And I think here we are again with more truth to that fact.
Yeah, I think it is a huge setback for all the entities here involved. Yes, we have that DOJ report that was prepared during a previous administration, I might add. And now we have a new administration that really, as far as they're concerned, put it on the shelf somewhere, never to be seen again. And then you have a city administration that, for whatever reason, righteous or otherwise, they said, we are not going to go into any kind of consent decree. It's too costly, to this, to that. But we are going to put together this committee, this group, the fact-finding group, and they are fine people, all of them. But again, you ask about the public here. And I think this really does damage to the public perception that fairness is involved, not just in the police department, but in the police department working with all of these other entities, to the point that you brought up, that says, we can't get a fair shake in this community. And my trust in the entities, the institutions that are designed to protect and serve, they're not doing that well.
Or maybe protection and service is just a political facade. It's something that you put forth. What you really mean is punishment and surveillance, which is what we experienced here. And so again, I don't see how we can reasonably expect anything less than skepticism, because the system and the structure keeps proving itself insofar as its inability to give the average black man or woman a fair trial in the system. One thing we didn't discuss last week, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, Otis. I know we talked about it a little bit. The first thing I thought when I heard about the makeup of the jury is, how did this happen? No African Americans, not an African American man, not an African American woman. I sat in that courtroom. I looked. Now, I know some of this is going to be biased based upon my perception, right? But ethnically, I saw a bunch of conventional white men and women. I saw one brother who probably is Latino, but could pass for white. I saw one sister who may have been Asian or Filipino or Latina. Other than that, it looked like what you think when you close your eyes and say Chattanooga.
What was the jury pool? I mean, the broader makeup.
Great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Our Lauren Turman does have that information, but I do want to cut it off here for now. Thank you so much, Pastor Fisher, for being here. I know you have to leave. Yeah. We will continue our conversation with Otis Sanford. But for now, as we continue coverage, we're going to toss it back over to Ruben Diaz, ABC 24 anchor. Ruben.
All right, thanks a lot, Pepper, and thank you to both of our panelists here who are taking time out of their day to help us get a better idea of how the community is going to see and deal with the verdict that came down today. Let's go right back now out to the courtroom where ABC 24's Lauren Turman has been there for the entirety of this case. And now we're going to talk a little bit about policies and procedures with Lauren. And Lauren, can you tell us a little bit about what we're hearing at this point in time?
Ruben, so what we've really been hearing is a lot of that coming from the witnesses that the defense brought up. There are a couple of really crucial points that I want to bring to your attention because they all measures of this case over the last 9 days that we've been seeing these trial proceedings. The first is that, as I mentioned before, some of the law enforcement officers went over a lot of Memphis police procedures and policies. Of course, they were saying that what these ex-officers did was consistent with procedures that night. Those include some running policies about not necessarily running after somebody who is a shoplifter or burglar. The defense really mentioned a lot of key points about that particular system of implementation that they had, but they also talked a lot about the contents of Tyrie's car, which is a fair point that officers did not know what was inside of the contents of his car the night they stopped him, but of course investigations revealed later what was in them. They talked a lot about psilocybin mushrooms, which is a hallucinogenic mushroom that was not found inside of Tyrie's system at the time of his death. The only things that were found inside of there were consistent with typical marijuana use and alcohol that was under the legal limit. So that is an important point to bring up, that they did not know what was inside of the car. But otherwise in there, stolen IDs and some other stolen credit cards were brought up consistently throughout this trial, and them trying to paint Tyrie out to be a criminal. So what exactly does all of this have to do with the policies and procedures of this police department? Well, they were talking about that in terms of who Tyrie was as a person, but also specifically about the kinds of force that they used and whether or not they were determining the police officers used excessive or deadly force when dealing with Tyrie that night. They said that they used certain lock hand procedures on him because they were attempting to put handcuffs on him, but they weren't really fully able to do so in the beginning of the night. So they used certain hand procedures on him where they would try to lock him up as they were deploying pepper spray, as they were trying to hold his arms back, as they were saying, "Give me your hands," repeatedly. So those were consistent, as the jury found, with some of the policies and procedures that Memphis police had laid out. So those are very important points in terms of just what had happened that night. I know some points of the video, it could be hard for the average person to see what each and every officer was doing at what exact time. So that gave a little bit more clarity as to what these policies and procedures were and how consistently these ex-officers were abiding by them. Also, Pepper had asked me a question about some of the highlights of the of the prosecution witnesses. Ex-officer Preston Hemphill also came to the stand earlier in the week. He was a prosecution witness that went from one day into the morning of the next, and he talked also about some of those procedures. He was fired from the Memphis Police Department, but he did not have any charges, so he talked more closely about what they were doing that night, specifically as it came to pepper spray use, specifically as it came to trying to lock people's arms behind their back and put those handcuffs on them, and the kind of arm were trying to restrain Tyrie back as those punches and kicks were coming towards his body, and him kind of trying to defend himself and restrain in that way. And they were talking about what that meant, what exactly those procedures look like in terms of trying to hold someone's arm back. So a lot of different things to definitely keep up with in terms of consistent use. Of course, the jury found all of these ex-officers not guilty of all of those charges, so they did find that the procedures and policies were consistent with what Memphis police had already laid out at this time. But again, some of those important points had really kind of unveiled themselves. We heard about the stolen IDs and we'd heard about the stolen credit cards before, but hearing just a little bit more of what was in Tyrie's system, and that they didn't find that out until after that initial stop had happened, until much after and investigators had taken over that case. So a couple of points I want to bring to your attention and at this time about that policy and procedure and how that could have potentially swayed the jury to their not guilty verdict. Back to you.
Lauren, before I let you go, I do need to ask you one more time because, people are joining us maybe a little later than earlier. And we talked a little bit about, you mentioned policies and procedures, how that's been a big topic of conversation. But Lauren, could you take us back through the jury pool, like what the jury looked like, what the makeup was like, and any information or conversation that's been had since then about what the pool makeup was as far as who they had to pick from?
So, Ruben, this jury was taken from Chattanooga, which we just actually found out a few minutes ago from Prosecutor Paul Hagerman that they were chosen from the Chattanooga area because it had the least amount of media exposure. It had really had the less amount of coverage and extent to those people that were in Chattanooga. So that's why they went there and selected them. The jury initially started with 16 people, 10 women, and of whom were white passing. It was then eventually whittled down to those 12 final jurors. The one person who was not white passing, I believe, had some kind of a medical issue, and they were taken outside and had to leave the jury, but they ended up being 12 white passing people, 8 of whom were women and 4 of whom were men. So, and a lot of them also were looked to be above the age of 50, and about 2 or 3 looked to be under the age of 40. So that gives you a little bit more of the jury makeup and just kind of reference. That has been, of course, a very hot topic issue in terms of the all-white passing makeup of that jury and how that could potentially play in to the verdict that they delivered. You heard District Attorney Steve Mulroy kind of saying that's been a hot topic, but he's not really sure, of course, into how all of that played into it. But that is a little bit more of a breakdown of what things looked like and how that jury eventually looked after final selections were over. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Lauren. Thank you so much for your reporting. And of course, we'll check back in here in a few minutes with even more information. Let's turn back now to ABC 24 anchor Pepper Baker, who's getting even more reaction from our political analyst, Otis Sanford, joining us now live in the studio. Pepper?
Continuing that conversation. So before we really break down a little bit more about the jury and the decision from that, we have to remember that there is a family here mourning. And 2023, 2 years ago, we're seeing they're sitting in courtrooms 2 years later, hoping to get the justice for Tyre Nichols. And I just want your thoughts about Rovon Wells, Rodney, and just the family, the Nichols family, and how they're grasping with this verdict.
Well, it has to be a gut punch for them. I mean, we've seen Rovon Wells now, as you say, for actually 2.5 years now. We've watched her, we've seen her facial expressions, we've seen her dignity, we've seen how she spoke. Murder charges, they surely would have been convicted of some of the lesser charges. I'm sure they're thinking about that. So it has to be a gut punch for them as they try to absorb what happened today down in the criminal court.
Her strength, I can only just imagine how strong she has to be right now.
Absolutely.
I had conversations with people just about the length of all of this and where Rovon might be standing with the first time being confronted with those 3 men, or all 5 really, and then eventually the 3 on trial. So how do you just put into words about, the time we saw where CJ Davis and Mary Young were standing up with her in press conferences, and then we saw the civil suit come down against the city with the Nichols family against the city, and just how the relationships, the nature of how this has kind of ebbed and flowed throughout the entire 2.5 years from the beginning to now with Rovon and the city of Memphis, where it's whether that's Mary Young and CJ Davis, to even having to deal with seeing those 5 officers, but the 3 time and time again. Mm-hmm. I guess, is there a sense of just acceptance? I mean, obviously justice, you still want justice, but to be able to stand in front of all these people all this time, how do you feel that relationship works its way through?
Well, that's a great question. And I do believe that when you talk about Mayor C.J. Davis, for example, she was praised at the beginning of this case for her forthrightness, the fact that the officers were fired right away. She came out and made a lot of public statements. They rushed to get the video out into the public. I remember us staying here like 5 or 6 hours watching it and then going on the air. So, I mean, she was praised not just by local people, but by the national media for how she handled this. But you have to believe that which is a massive lawsuit in terms of the damages that the family is seeking. You know, obviously that had to put a little bit of a distance between the family and the city as they go through that process, because, you know, now they're at adversarial ends of the spectrum. So it can't be the same way it was initially when Chief Davis was being very forthright about how these officers, violated procedure. That was not what they were trained to do. That's not what they were supposed to do. They were fired immediately and all of that. So, yeah, I mean, there's an obvious strain here as it relates to Mayor Young. He was not the mayor when it happened, I believe. If it was January 23. Yeah, he was elected in October of 2023. But since then, I thought he has handled the case the way you would expect a mayor to handle it, in terms of, making sure that the police department does respond to the allegations that, for example, were leveled by the Department of Justice. Even though he said he's not going to do a consent decree, he assured us that he's going to address these charges. I just don't think right now there's any kind of a relationship or any kind of bonding, obviously, between the police, the city, and the family. It just can't be, not with the circumstances that we have now.
Right, and I know the two are separate, the state trial and the civil case with the $500 million on the table, but I can't imagine that the verdict from today won't just make Tyre Nichols' family and the attorney Ben Crump use that to get justice in the civil case at all.
Well, I mean, I think, and I don't know the extent to which that verdict or these verdicts today will show up in the civil case. I do believe that you will have more proof and more testimony in that civil case about the policies and procedures, things that we did not have in this criminal case, because that goes to the culpability of the police department, and it goes to the culpability of the city as a whole. They violated policy. They deprived this man of his life and liberty in pursuit of happiness. And so you will hear a lot more testimony, I believe, in the civil trial about policies and procedures, far more than you heard in this case, because we really didn't hear much of that at all.
Yes. Now let's take it back to the jury makeup, and I wish I would have maybe even asked this with Pastor Fisher here, but we talk about race being played here. So the Chattanooga area, and we heard Lauren say the jury was made up of 8 women, 4 men that were all white passing. But we are talking about a case here that is different than other police brutality cases in the nature of the cops also being black along with the victim.
Right.
So when you have, let's say that, what you and Pastor Fisher say, that the jury being from a demographic of mostly white people, is it interesting to think of how they would perceive black cops as opposed to other police brutality cases where it's white cops against a black victim?
Well, we're really getting into a deep discussion, as we should here, because you're right. First of all, this is not the typical Derek Chauvin case, for example, where you have white cops and an African American defendant. This is not some of the other, Rodney King and even here in Memphis with Elton Hayes and things. You don't have that here, but you still have the culture. And the culture, historically, of Memphis police, in some respects, has been oppressive to African American citizens. That's just a fact. I mean, we've had one consent decree in the past that dealt with, running roughshod over citizens who were African Americans or people of color. The fact that you had a jury from Chattanooga. And I don't know any of these folks. And I'm sure they are well-meaning citizens. They wouldn't have been picked for a jury if they were not. But they did not bring the cultural understanding of what Memphis is about when it comes to police and community relations. That played positively for the defense in this case. So again, as I said a few minutes ago, when Pastor Fisher was here, it would have been incumbent then on the prosecution to cut through that and help this jury understand that even though everybody involved here was the same race, there's a culture here. There's a belief system here that no matter whether you're an African American or a white officer, when you violate policy, you violate policy. And that's what happened here, no matter what race the police officer was. But obviously, this, to me, was a police-friendly jury. Didn't matter whether the race of the police officers, and the prosecution failed to cut through that with enough evidence to at least get some of these charges across the guilty verdict line.
And so police reform, there have been calls since, especially since Tyre Nichols' case. So over the last 2 years, I feel like we would be remiss to not talk about some of the steps that the city and MPD has taken or have taken to reform a little bit. So I know that the Downtown Command Center, when we talk about cameras, cameras were a big part of this case. The Downtown Command Center just opened up. It's robust, more cameras around the city, AI technology, all of this. What do you think about the efforts since we saw the video come out and what's happened and the calls for it and the demands and the progress being made to make sure police we don't fall into the same patterns and practices that have been proven to disenfranchise our people?
Well, I think for the most part, Pepper, all of the new technology that has been unveiled, and especially recently with the Downtown Command Center, all of that is for adequate policing to nab the bad people and to show the community, which this community is still upset about the level of crime in the community. And so all of that is to show the community that we are doing a much more aggressive job of keeping you safe as you go downtown, as you go about your business. I didn't get the impression that it was that much to the point of making sure that the cops don't beat you up and do you like Tyre Nichols. Now, that could be part of it. But I just don't see that as being the major thrust of all of the new technology and the command centers and the real-time stuff that's going on. That's more to keep the rest of the public safe. Again, I just think that it is going to be now up to Police Chief C.J. Davis, and I haven't heard any statement that she's made as a result of the guilty verdicts today. It'll be up to Mayor Paul Young to come out and assure Memphians that despite this verdict, we are still committed to making sure that the police treat citizens with respect and dignity, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that that continues. We have this committee chaired by former Judge Bernice Donald, and with some great people on it. They are looking at policies and procedures. They will make some recommendations. They're not an enforcement group, but they'll make some recommendations. We are committed to listening to what they have to say, and we are committed to making sure that the public feels that they can trust the police to protect and serve and not beat you up.
And if they can do that, I see that as a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, if they can do it. The question is, will the people believe it? And this verdict is setting that belief back just a little bit.
I want to ask about recruitment too, because not only, the people's trust, but does this have an effect on how to get officers to join MPD's force?
Oh, I think so. As a matter of fact, I was having some conversations a week or so ago with some people, and they were saying, Well, if the officers came back guilty, that was going to hurt morale, recruitment, and retention. But I think even the acquittals are going to hurt, especially recruitment and retention, because if we see what I expect that we will see, that the community will say, I just don't trust the police officers. I just don't trust the police department. They'll beat me up and think that they can get away with it. That's not a good atmosphere in order to recruit and bring people into the department. I've seen some commercials on television where they're trying to recruit more officers, but we'll see where that lands. But with the public, I believe, and again, this is a non-militant community when it comes to rising up, so I don't think you're going to have any problems with that. But I do think you're going to have people who will say, this is just another example of why I can't trust the police department.
So we have a couple lasting minutes here, and I just think that when we talk about what justice looks like, so in the coming years, I know when I used to work in St. Louis, Mike Brown has an anniversary where they go back to the very place that he was shot. How do you think Memphians will honor Tyrie if they did not feel that justice was served today? Oh, I think Tyrie will still get the attention and the recognition, the honor that he has been getting. I believe that every January, probably. I think this happened on the 7th of January, 2023. I think you're going to have people either doing roller skate exercises or doing something, maybe gathering on the river or whatever they could do to remember Tyre Nichols. Even though the defense in this trial attempted to besmirch his reputation a bit, I don't think that's going to do anything to taint his memory. Because when we look at what happened here, no matter what Tyre Nichols had in his trunk or didn't have in his trunk, he did not deserve to die. And there was no reason for him to be treated the way he was treated that night. And it is just a shame that the family didn't get the justice that they think that they deserved here, because at the end, we still have a young man, 29 years old, who is dead as a result of something that should never have happened. So I think people will remember him. They will honor him going forward, I think every year or whenever the opportunity arises. Are you shocked to see the jury take the time they did? A couple of days. Were you shocked to see that, or was that a pretty fair amount of time? No, I thought that was a pretty fair amount of time. I was expecting it to go a little longer. Matter of fact, that's why I wasn't here when the very beginning of the day. I was doing something else. But again, it would be helpful. And we used to do this back in the day, Pepper, when I covered the courts. We had an opportunity to talk to jurors almost immediately. I was talking to jurors that afternoon if a verdict came down. And I'm talking about federal juries and state juries. And you don't get that opportunity too much anymore just because people want their privacy a little bit more. But I think over time, hopefully enterprising reporters will track down some of these jurors, and I'd like to get their take on it. But it's, I think the appropriate amount of time was taken. I'm just not sure that they had enough evidence in front of them to satisfy what the prosecution was trying to do. Okay. All right, Otis. Thank you so much for being here.
Continue with us and watch free now on the 24 Plus app everywhere you stream.
So we are obviously disappointed by today's verdict. We respect the jury's decision, but we obviously strongly disagree with it. We, in good faith, brought this case, and I am convinced to this day that we had compelling evidence that showed that there was proof for every element of every one of the offenses that we charged. The jury took a different view. That is, of course, their right. That's the part of the decision. I want to start out by commending the trial team, Mr. Hagerman, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Headley, who did an excellent job. I wouldn't have done anything different. I thought they brought a compelling case to bear. I also want to commend the family of Tyre Nichols, who showed extraordinary grace and resilience through an incredible ordeal, an unimaginable ordeal. It's hard for me to understand, as I'm sure it's hard for the public to understand, or many in the public anyway, who watched that video, who heard the testimony, who heard the compelling arguments of trial counsel. It's hard for us to imagine how someone could say that none of the defendants were guilty of any of the charges. I personally think any fair-minded person who watches the video would come to the conclusion that everybody there had some responsibility for Tyre Nichols' death. But as I said, the jury took a different view. What I do know is this: Tyre Nichols is dead and deserves to be alive. And that is a tragedy. It's my hope that the public understands that this is part of the system, and that our office will continue to push for accountability for everybody who violates the law, including, if not especially, those who are sworn to uphold it.
What do you think what just didn't connect? What do you think it was? Was it the training? Was it the character witnesses? What do you think it was? It's
so hard to figure that out. It could be any number of a million things, and I am disinclined to try to say, oh, we should have done this differently or we should have done that differently, because I think the trial team did an excellent job. Obviously you had a situation where, arguably two of the more culpable defendants were not present. Then that allowed the remaining defendants to point the finger at others. I personally think that when you take a look at all of the evidence, that shouldn't matter. Perhaps the jury took a different view. It's just impossible to say.
I know it's very early, but is this a case that you all are looking to retry?
I think it is too early for us to say that. I don't know what the grounds would be for that. We do have to accept the finality of a jury verdict in most cases.
Any thoughts about the jury being from Chattanooga and an all-white jury?
Obviously, people have mentioned that as an issue. I'm not going to speculate about that. I think it's a testimony to the fairness of our criminal justice system that we bent over backwards to get a jury from another jurisdiction to assure that the defendants were given a fair trial. Beyond that, I don't think I should comment.
The defense worked on pointing at Emmett Martin as the most violent of everyone there. It seems that they may have landed with the jury. You're securing a guilty plea for Emmett Martin. Can you talk a little more about his involvement?
Well, obviously, I think the proof speaks for itself, and Mr. Martin was, extremely involved and culpable, and played a key role in the unjustified death of Tyre Nichols. What's going to happen over at the federal court and what will happen with his case remains to be seen.
What kind of conversation did you have with Tyre Nichols' family when they left today?
We spoke to them briefly. Obviously, they were devastated. I think you could imagine that they would be devastated. I think they were outraged, and I think we can understand why they'd be outraged by this result, given the evidence. They quite understandably decided that they needed to go home and process all this, and we're going to give them that respect and respect their privacy.
What sort of message does this give to specifically the Memphis Police Department, who just got done with this pattern and practice investigation and really doesn't have to grapple with the consequences of that either?
Right. So it's important to note that, there have been guilty verdicts over on the federal side. I'm not going to speculate about what will happen over on the federal side, but it's not like there have been no consequences whatsoever from the tragic killing of Tyre Nichols. I personally think that if we're going to make any sense of this tragedy, if we're going to have any silver lining from this dark cloud of both the event itself and, in my view, today's verdict, it has to be that we need to reaffirm our commitment to police reform and to doing what we need to do to make sure that tragedies like this don't happen again. And I remain committed to that. I'm sure the city of Memphis remains committed to that, and we're not giving up on that.
Are you surprised that they didn't? Because they could have gone for lesser charges than second-degree murder. 9 different charges they could have gotten, and they didn't even have to go to those. Did that surprise you?
Was I surprised that there wasn't a single guilty verdict on any of the counts or any of the lesser included offenses, given the overwhelming evidence that I think that we presented? Yes, I was surprised. Do I have an explanation for it? No.
How much did the state rely on the videos from that night, the Sky Cop video, the body cam videos? How much did you all rely on that as far as this trial goes?
Well, I mean, you saw the evidence. You saw the trial as well as I. I think it speaks for itself. Certainly the videos were a big part of the state's case, as they understandably would be. But I don't think the trial team relied entirely on the videos. I think they brought to bear witness testimony, very effective cross-examination of the defense witnesses, and some compelling opening and closing arguments. And I think when you add it all together, I think the state did a hell of a job. I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking about any of the decisions the trial team made. I think they did an excellent job. They're a credit to our office. Anybody who does any kind of jury trial work knows that you just can't predict what a jury will do. Them's the breaks, and it's a bitter pill to swallow, particularly in a case like this. But like I said, we can strongly disagree with the jury's verdict, but we nonetheless respect the jury.
Do you have any messages for people in the community who have had direct confrontations with not only the Scorpion team, but other police officers? There are federal lawsuits that are currently underway, people who have accused the Memphis Police Department of brutality. Do you have any message to them?
I guess my message to the community would be twofold. A, even if you were out there outraged by this verdict, please respond in a lawful, peaceful manner. Second, as I said earlier, with respect to any charge of violation of the law, including by those who are sworn to uphold it, we'll enforce the law. And just as we did aggressively in this case, we'll do that in any other case in which the facts and the law suggest that anybody in the law enforcement community or anybody else has violated the law and used excessive force.
Does Mr. Hackerman or Headley or Johnson have any comment?
Yeah, please.
Y'all tried the case.
Hacker?
We tried real hard. We fought real hard in there. We knew this was always going to be difficult. As DA Mulroy said, we're trying the 3 least culpable in terms of, obviously, Mr. Martin was the primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. Mr. Mills, with the baton strikes, again, a primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. So we knew this trial would be hard. I think y'all saw us fight in there. We did the best we could, and the family, they've been great through this. Today's heartbreaking to them, but they've been with us fighting.
What is it like for you all to go through all of this and looking at the video and talking with the family? definitely expecting something else.
You know, it's disappointing. It's heartbreaking. You try cases. It's a business of trying cases, though. Okay? There's always a risk and there's reward, but we keep on going. We try to get justice. And I think we tried hard in there this week to get justice. I know the family was behind us, and, you know, we didn't get the result we wanted or they wanted, but they've thought about Tyrie obviously a lot this week, and they're thinking about Tyrie now. And Melons, Janisha, Nathan.
Was there any bit of evidence that was presented over the last week and a half, or any argument made by the defense that felt particularly salient to you guys that you kind of were like, this kind of sucks to deal with and try and like move around?
I don't think we can at this point sort of, like I said, you know, Monday morning quarterback or you know, think retroactively about this or that. You know, this blow was particularly powerful, that one was particularly powerful. I think structurally, as Mr. Hagman's already mentioned, the two defendants who were most culpable weren't present in the courtroom, right? That doesn't mean that the remaining three defendants weren't culpable. You know, you heard our arguments in there about criminal responsibility, people being responsible for the acts of another, the duty to intervene, the duty to take affirmative steps at what was clearly, you know, a person being beaten to death. That was a structural part of the trial that was a challenge for the trial team. Other than that, I think it's hard to identify any one thing, and it's hard to get inside the mind of the jury.
Will this verdict, is this going to affect Emmett Martin's plea deal at all, or any sentence he may receive when he does plead guilty?
That's up to the federal court. You know, we really can't speculate on
What
that.
about on the state level?
Well, I think we're not really prepared to talk about that just yet, because what we're doing is we're waiting to see what happens over with the federal sentencing. And once we see what happens with the federal sentencing, we'll have a better idea of what we want to do with that case.
And my last question about the jury, because obviously the jury made the decision, but those who don't understand the process, I know you all want an unbiased jury, but why Chattanooga? Where'd that come from as far as that jurisdiction?
That backfired on them.
There was a motion filed to defense to change venue, and there was a study done of the amount of publicity in the various large cities in Tennessee, and it was found that Chattanooga had the lowest amount of pretrial publicity with regard to this case, and so that's why it was chosen.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Why do so many people trust iHerb for their health and wellness products? Simple. We guarantee freshness. Buy direct from manufacturers and ship fast to your doorstep. So, fitness fanatics, stretchaholics, immunity boosters, weight shedders, light sleepers, dog mommies, mommy mommies, even the good doctor here. They all trust iHerb to deliver the freshest, high-quality health and wellness products on Earth. iHerb's curated selection of products are quality tested, stored in climate-controlled facilities, and shipped fresh. Seems pretty obvious, but it's just one of the many ways we make wellness better. iHerb.
We want to get to breaking news now out of Memphis. The jury has found 3 former police officers charged in the deadly beating of Tyre Nichols not guilty on all 7 state counts. The officers' charges included second-degree murder, aggravated assault, and aggravated kidnapping. Last year, the 3 were among a total of 5 convicted on federal charges, including witness tampering. Police camera footage captured officers kicking and punching Nichols after he fled a January 2023 traffic stop. He died 3 days after the beating. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca has been following this case every step of the way. And Omar, remember that video when it came out, just so tremendously disturbing and upsetting. Take us through this decision.
Well, of course, the judge came forward and the court said that the verdict had been reached. So everybody came on in and they filed in. The judge told everyone not to, no outbursts in the court, which is pretty typical in emotional cases like this. And as you mentioned, Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Justin Smith, all found not guilty. They each faced 7 charges, the big one being second-degree murder. That was punishable by up to 15 to 25 years in prison. Official oppression, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, all those charges that you mentioned. all not guilty. A little background here on this jury, though. This happened in Memphis, Shelby County, near the Arkansas border. That's where Memphis is. Well, during the course of this trial, they were saying we needed to find an impartial jury, so they had to go 300 plus miles to Chattanooga area, Hamilton County, to find that jury. So the jury is not from Memphis. They are from Hamilton County, 300 plus miles away. We found out it is an all-white jury. There were no African Americans on that jury. The jury in Memphis is a predominantly African American town. So that's something that now people are talking about. A little bit more of some perspective here. There was a federal trial before this, and those officers either pled guilty or were found guilty of charges, but they were lesser charges, everything from excessive force with injury and witness tampering. They have not been sentenced for the federal crimes that they were convicted of, so we're going to wait to see. But the families are looking for justice, and now they're not going to get it from the state side. They feel they're going to have to get it from the federal. We have to see with those lesser charges what kind of sentence comes from that.
Any reaction that you're tracking so far?
It's very early. Some of the family is in there. They were quiet. They weren't allowed, obviously, no outbursts of any sort. But we're waiting to see if they come out and speak. Interesting note that we do have some reporting from Elise Preston also told us that the prosecution brought 5 witnesses forward. The defense brought 17 witnesses. And keep in mind, the burden of proof is on the prosecution to prove their case. That's what they used, 5 witnesses. The defense used 17 witnesses, and maybe that weighed in on the jury. They polled the jury. It was unanimous on their decision-making, but unless the jurors want to talk to find out what exactly convinced them, we may never know.
This is a shot inside the courthouse right now that we are watching. There were 2 other officers who did not stand in this trial. Where do they fall in the case?
Mm-hmm. Well, some of them were involved in the federal trial, and some of them also testified in cases too, talking about their action. Now, the defense basically, part of their argument was that everything that they were doing was part of their training. They were saying the whole time that Tyre Nichols, when you saw the video of the beating, they said they kept on asking him to comply. They kept on asking him to comply, give him his hands so they could put him in cuffs. And the defense kept on saying once the cuffs were on, the beating stopped. Now, there was arguments of prosecution saying this was excessive force, this is what caused it, and that nobody was stopping anybody else from hitting him. And the prosecution was relying on that, hoping that the jury would see that as enough to reach that bar for second-degree murder. But as we learned just a few minutes ago, it was not. They were not guilty on all charges.
What happens next in this case? What are you tracking?
Well, there's going to be civil first of all, and granted, there's no jail time for a civil case. This could challenge, obviously, the way Memphis PD operates, and that's no solace. That's not going to bring back Nichols for their family. But we want to see what kind of punishment is going to be handed down on the federal case, which already happened. But again, those officers were convicted on lesser charges. There was no murder charge. Like I said, the charges were excessive force with injury and witness tampering on the federal level, not the second-degree murder that would have gotten 15 to 25 on the state level.
Okay. Omar Villafranca, thank you. Let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Rebecca Roifi now. What is your reaction to this verdict?
I think it's extremely significant, especially given the fact that this administration, this federal administration, has indicated that it is less interested in pursuing police reform than previous administrations and is backing off those kinds of efforts. So we're going to see fewer of the kinds of cases that settled earlier for these police officers, and more will rest on what states do and what state juries do. And so I think a lot of people are paying attention to this, and it is a significant case because it is not sending the messages that the families of the victim would have wanted here and other activists would have wanted, instead sending a very different message.
Right, he was pulled over, and then later the Memphis police chief found that there was no real reason to pull him over. He had fled the traffic stop, run toward his mother's house, was screaming for her while this was happening. I want to see if you can pick up on what Omar was talking about in terms of the difference between the state and federal charges and the severity, the state charges being second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, amongst other state charges. Omar saying that the second-degree murder could have
called for 15 to 20 years in prison versus the federal charges that they were found guilty of, which was witness tampering and excessive force.
Right, exactly. I mean, there were federal charges of civil rights violations resulting in death or injury, but those are not the charges that they pled guilty to. So these other charges are going to result in, much less significant sentences, especially given the fact that they were pleas. And so, again, I mean, of course it's significant. Any amount of jail time is significant, and that does send a message. But I think the message is muted in large part by this verdict, which, is loud and clear, given the fact that they didn't find even any of these lesser charges that the police officers were guilty. And so as a result, yes, there will be some consequences and some accountability. And that's important. As Omar was saying, it's really important that we look at this not just from a criminal justice perspective, but from the perspective of police reform. And that may indeed happen within Memphis and within other cities. But, to the extent that you're looking for some, big deterrent and big, moment of accountability and a moment in which we really think about what our relationship to police are and police brutality, this is not that moment.
Let's go ahead and listen to some of the live remarks that we're capturing outside the courthouse.
Listen up. Here's what a fresh start can sound like in 2025. Look forward to the satisfying unboxing of pre-portioned packs. Hear the barks of excitement and enjoy the melody of your dog happily scarfing down every last bite. A fresh start starts now. Get your first box of the Farmer's Dog 50% off.
Getting your dream kitchen is easier than you think. Cabinets to Go can design a beautiful, high-quality, and affordable kitchen makeover that is sure to wow. Choose from thousands of the latest designer styles
baby,
and
if
color
y'all don't think we, the people, gonna be in trouble.
Those who are sworn to uphold it.
What do you think the, what just didn't connect? What do you think it was? Was it the training?
She did her thing, baby, right there.
What do you think it was?
It's so hard to figure that out. It could be any number of a million things, and I am disinclined to try to say, oh, we should have done this differently or we should have done that differently, because I think the trial team did an excellent job.
Yeah, I'll get the lights up.
Obviously you had a situation where
the lights are not adding up.
Two of the more culpable defendants were not present. Then that allowed the remaining defendants to point the finger at others. I personally think that when you take a look at all of the evidence, that shouldn't matter. Perhaps the jury took a different view. It's just impossible to say.
I know it's very early, but is this a case that you all are looking to retry?
I think it is too early for us to say that. I don't know what the grounds would be for that. We do have to accept the finality of a jury verdict in most cases.
Any thoughts about the jury being from Chattanooga and an all-white jury?
Obviously, people have mentioned that as an issue. I'm not going to speculate about that. I think it's a testimony to the fairness of our criminal justice system that we bent over backwards to get a jury from another jurisdiction to assure that the defendants were given a fair trial. Beyond that, I don't think I should comment.
The defense worked on pointing at Emmett Martin as the most violent of everyone there. It seems that they may have landed with the jury. You're securing a guilty plea for Emmett Martin. Can you talk a little more about his involvement?
Well, obviously, I think the proof speaks for itself, and Mr. Martin was, extremely involved and culpable, and played a key role in the unjustified death of Tyre Nichols. What's going to happen over at the federal court and what will happen with his case remains to be seen.
What kind of conversation did you have with Tyre Nichols' family when they left today?
We spoke to them briefly. Obviously, they were devastated. I think you could imagine that they would be devastated. I think they were outraged, and I think we can understand why they'd be outraged by this result, given the evidence. They quite understandably decided that they needed to go home and process all this, and we're going to give them that respect and respect their privacy.
What sort of message does this give to specifically the Memphis Police Department, who just got done with this pattern and practice investigation and really doesn't have to grapple with the consequences of that either?
Right. So it's important to note that, There have been guilty verdicts over on the federal side. I'm not going to speculate about what will happen over on the federal side, but it's not like there have been no consequences whatsoever from the tragic killing of Tyre Nichols. I personally think that if we're going to make any sense of this tragedy, if we're going to have any silver lining from this dark cloud of both the event itself and, in my view, today's verdict, it has to be that we need to reaffirm our commitment to police reform and to doing what we need to do to make sure that tragedies like this don't happen again. And I remain committed to that. I'm sure the city of Memphis remains committed to that, and we're not giving up on that.
Are you surprised that they didn't? Because they could have gone for lesser charges than second-degree murder. What, 9 different charges they could have gotten, and they didn't even have to go to those. Did that surprise you?
Was I surprised that there wasn't a single guilty verdict on any of the counts or any of the lesser included offenses, given the overwhelming evidence that I think that we presented? Yes, I was surprised. Do I have an explanation for it? No.
How much did the state rely on the videos from that night, the Skycop video, the body cam videos? How much did you all rely on that as far as this trial goes?
Well, I mean, you saw the evidence. You saw the trial as well as I. I think it speaks for itself. Certainly the videos were a big part of the state's case, as they understandably would be. But I don't think the trial team relied entirely on the videos. I think they brought to bear witness testimony, very effective cross-examination of the defense witnesses, and some compelling opening and closing arguments. And I think when you add it all together, I think the state did a hell of a job. I'm not Monday morning quarterbacking about any of the decisions the trial team made. I think they did an excellent job. They're a credit to our office. You know, anybody who does any kind of jury trial work knows that you just can't predict what a jury will do. Them's the breaks, and it's a bitter pill to swallow, particularly in a case like this. But like I said, we can strongly disagree with the jury's verdict, but we nonetheless respect the jury.
Do you have any messages for people in the community who have had direct confrontations with not only the Scorpion team, but other police officers? There are federal lawsuits that are currently underway, people who have accused the Memphis Police Department of brutality. Do you have any message to them?
I guess my message to the community would be twofold. A, even if you were out there outraged by this verdict, please respond in a lawful, peaceful manner. Second, as I said earlier, with respect to any charge of violation of the law, including by those who are sworn to uphold it, we'll enforce the law. And just as we did aggressively in this case, we'll do that in any other case in which the facts and the law suggest that anybody in the law enforcement community or anybody else has violated the law and used excessive force.
Does Mr. Hackerman or Headley or Johnson have any comment
Yeah,
about
please.
the trial case?
Hacker?
We tried real hard. We fought real hard in there. We knew this was always going to be difficult. As DA Mulroy said, we're trying the 3 least culpable in terms of, obviously, Mr. Martin was the primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. Mr. Mills, with the baton strikes, again, a primary actor, and he's entered a guilty plea. So we knew this trial would be hard. I think y'all saw us fight in there. We did the best we could, and the family, they've been great through this. Today's heartbreaking to them, but they've been with us fighting.
What is it like for you all to go through all of this and looking at the video and talking with the family and definitely expecting something else?
It's disappointing. It's heartbreaking. You try cases. It's a business of trying cases, though. Okay? There's always a risk and there's reward, but we keep on going. We try to get justice. And I think we tried hard in there this week to get justice. I know the family was behind us, and, we didn't get the result we wanted or they wanted, but they've thought about Tyrie, obviously, a lot this week, and they're thinking about Tyrie now, and it's been hard.
Tanisha? Nathan?
Was there any bit of evidence that was presented over the last week and a half, or any argument made by the defense that felt particularly salient to you guys, that you kind of were like, this kind of sucks to deal with and try and move around?
I don't think we can at this point sort of like I said, Monday morning quarterback or think retroactively about this or that. This blow was particularly powerful, that one was particularly powerful. I think structurally, as Mr. Hagerman's already mentioned, the two defendants who were most culpable weren't present in the courtroom, right? That doesn't mean that the remaining three defendants weren't culpable. You heard our arguments in there about criminal responsibility, people being responsible for the acts of another, the duty to intervene, the duty to take affirmative steps at what was clearly, a person being beaten to death. That was a structural part of the trial that was a challenge for the trial team. Other than that, I think it's hard to identify any one thing, and it's hard to get inside the mind of the jury.
Will this verdict, is this going to affect Emmett Martin's plea deal at all, or any sentence he may receive when he does plead guilty?
That's up to the federal court. We really can't speculate on
What about
that.
on the state level?
Well, I think we're not really prepared to talk about that just yet, because what we're doing is we're waiting to see what happens over with the federal sentencing. And once we see what happens with the federal sentencing, we'll have a better idea of what we want to do with that case.
And my last question about the jury, because obviously the jury made the decision, but those who don't understand the process, I know you all want an unbiased jury, but why Chattanooga? Where'd that come from as far as that jurisdiction?
I wouldn't know, yeah.
Yeah, there was a motion filed to defense to change venue, and there was a study done of the amount of publicity in the various large cities in Tennessee, and it was found that Chattanooga had the lowest amount of pretrial publicity with regard to this case, and so that's why it was chosen.
All right, thank you all very much.
Emergencies can strike at any time. That's why it's crucial to be prepared. Create a support system of people who can help you in a disaster. For people with disabilities and their families, it is important to consider individual needs to prepare for emergencies and disasters. Keep a contact list in your emergency kit or on your electronic devices. Designate 2 safe meeting places, one close to home and the other farther away. Also, if family members are separated, choose someone for everyone to call and report they are safe and.
All right. We were just listening to members of the prosecuting team reacting to the not guilty verdict to state.
Weren't culpable. You heard our arguments in there about criminal responsibility, people being responsible for the acts of another, the duty to intervene, the duty to take affirmative steps at what was clearly, a person being beaten to death. That was a structural part of the trial that was a challenge for the trial team. Other than that, I think it's hard to identify any one thing, and it's hard to get inside the mind of the jury.
Will this verdict, is this going to affect Emmett Martin's plea deal at all, or any sentence he may receive when he does plead guilty?
That's up to the federal court. We really can't speculate on
What about
that.
on the state level?
Well, I think we're not really prepared to talk about that just yet, because what we're doing is we're waiting to see what happens over with the federal sentencing. And once we see what happens with the federal sentencing, we'll have a better idea of what we want to do with that case.
And my last question about the jury, because obviously the jury made the decision, but those who don't understand the process, I know you all want an unbiased jury, but why Chattanooga? Where'd that come from as far as that jurisdiction?
I wouldn't know, yeah.
Yeah, there was a motion filed to defense to change venue, and there was a study done of the amount of publicity in the various large cities in Tennessee, and it was found that Chattanooga had the lowest amount of pretrial publicity with regard to this case, and so that's why it was chosen.
All right, thank you all very much.
All right. We were just listening to members of the prosecuting team reacting to the not guilty verdict to state charges against 3 of the officers involved in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. And we were hearing from District Attorney for Shelby County, Stephen Mulroy, as well as some of the prosecutors who led the trial team. I want to bring in CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca back because, Omar, we heard quite a bit from DA Mulroy there about whether they're going to retry the case. He said, he doesn't know on what grounds they would do that for. He mentioned he had spoken with the Nichols family. They are outraged and devastated. He mentioned commitment to police reform in Memphis and that he was surprised by the verdict and at this point didn't have an explanation as to why it went that way.
Well, and he also mentioned, talking about that Bean, Haley, and Smith, he kind of framed them as not the main culprits. The main culprits being Desmond Mills and Emmett Martin, who pled guilty to charges. They were not on trial. Basically calling them, these three former officers, kind of lesser actors, but still involved. So what happens next, we're going to have to wait and see. In these civil trials, I've covered enough of these, that in these civil trials, sometimes you can get a different verdict. And mind you, this is something where there's damages that can be awarded from the city may having to pay the family and the county having to pay the family. And sometimes that's the only way that sometimes police departments are forced to change their mode of operating. And I've covered cases like this in Texas and in South Carolina. So it makes police departments look at themselves. So while the jail time, they're going to have to wait for the punishment on the federal charges, which were lesser. Whether that leads to reform on the state level or the city level, the impetus may be the civil trial.
And I want to ask you about Martin and Mills, the two officers who the prosecuting team do point to as being the most culpable, those who pled guilty to the state charges. Did I hear the DA correctly, and that they are going to wait for the sentencing from the federal charges to ascertain what they're going to ask for in terms of sentencing, again, for these two officers not involved in this state trial case who were just found not guilty?
I believe you're correct, because mind you, there was plea deals on the federal level, but the punishments have not come down on the federal level just yet. They were waiting to see what happens on the state level. And the reason why, also probably to see what was happening here, but the lawyers also kind of don't want to step on each other's toes on the federal level and the state level, and then give a jury a chance on the state level, to weigh their judgment. They obviously did. And again, pointing to Mills and Martin being the bigger culprits in this. Martin was the one with the baton. If you happen to see the video, it's pretty brutal. You see the baton hits, and Mills obviously being involved with punching and the strikes. So there's going to be a lot of eyes also on the punishment for them for the federal level. And then again, I know I go back to this, but that civil trial, while it will not enact any jail time, that is the lesson, the pocketbook lesson that Shelby County and Memphis may have to deal with, which could lead to reforms.
Omar, hang out with us if you can. I want to bring Rebecca Boyfie back. Rebecca, a couple things that the DA mentioned and that Omar and I have been discussing that I want to ask of you. First off, when it comes to the two that were most culpable, according to DA Mulroy, Martin and Mills, whom they have guilty pleas from, they said it doesn't mean the remaining three don't bear some responsibility. And then they talked about the duty to intervene. Can you go into that for us?
Sure, absolutely. So, first of all, we're looking at criminal laws here, and that, the burden of proof is on the government to show that these, these were offenses that have very specific elements that were committed beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, there are so it depends exactly on what law you're talking about, whether or not there's a duty to intervene and to what extent that exists. And I think that's very important in the world of police reform, because that's where we see, room to push police officers, whether or not, there's a criminal verdict of guilty or not, but to behave in a way that we think as a community, our police officers should. And so that's built into the criminal law. And the fact that the jury did not find that there was a duty here does not mean that in other contexts there aren't duties, and that they don't matter, especially in the civil context. As Omar was saying, those cases will also help highlight what that duty is and in what context it pertains in these particular cases.
One of the prosecutors was also asked about the venue. Omar had been telling us that there had been a request for a venue change, for it not to be in Memphis. This took place in Chattanooga before an all-white jury. The trial attorney was asked, why Chattanooga? How did that come about? And he said that there was a survey and they found that that was the area that had the lowest amount of pre-trial publicity. What does that mean?
So when you're looking for a change in venue, the assumption is if you're going to change the venue that the jurors in a particular area have been exposed to just too much media and too much publicity on a particular subject to be fair and unbiased. And so if there's a determination that a change of venue is appropriate, what it essentially means is that you want to look for a venue where that is not the case. And so what the prosecutor was saying was that this was the closest venue that they could find where their surveys showed that the public had not been so tainted by particular knowledge or preconceptions of what happened in this case that they could sit on this jury and judge impartially.
When might we expect sentencing on the federal charges, the lesser charges for these 3 officers?
You know, I would imagine that would come, you know, I mean, things go at different paces, so it's not, you know, it's not clear, but it should be, you know, now that they've had this was one of the holdups, obviously they were waiting for this to happen. So I imagine they get themselves together in the next couple of months. We should see some kind of consequences in the federal case.
Is there anything that you want to touch on in terms of the civil aspect that Omar was talking about?
You know, well, I just want to say, I thought that there was, you know, a couple of things that were said at that press conference were really important to highlight. And that is that, you know, the fact that there was not a conviction here does not mean that something terribly wrong did not happen, and that there wasn't a tragedy, and that this tragedy could not have been averted. And I think it's important to look to those civil cases because they can push the police department in that direction, but so can the public. And I think it's extremely important to not end our interest in these questions with criminal cases, because criminal cases are just so idiosyncratic because of juries, and they're also you know, very specific in terms of what has to be proven and in what way and with what burden of proof. And so that does not mean that there will not be accountability. There isn't accountability. And even aside from accountability, the more important thing is, or at least as important, is that this be prevented from ever happening again. There are certainly things that could have been averted, whether or not there's criminal liability.
This is the quickest way to clear out stuck poop.
I have to poop, but it feels stuck. Stop! Are you trying to kill us? What? Fiber helps you poop.
No. Fiber bulks up stuck poop. It's like adding more cars to a traffic jam.
I'll try laxatives then.
Are you insane? Laxatives turn new poop into liquid diarrhea. But it doesn't get rid of the stuck poop that's causing us to be backed up and bloated.
Okay, Rebecca, let's go back to Omar. Omar, I believe I misspoke when I said the jury all white. There's an important distinction here. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, yeah, part of the jury, what I wanted to say is the jury pool was from Hamilton County, was from Chattanooga. They weren't from Memphis and Shelby County. So the jury pool, from what we, the trial, everything was Memphis based. Now, we've had reporters, and the DA you heard was asked about the jury. There was no African Americans on that jury. And now, granted, we want to see the boxes that if you've ever been called for jury, you check a box, you know, for race and whatnot. And you know, you can tell, but you don't know how people look. I don't have eyes on the jury, and the TV and the cameras can't show the jury. So that's something that we want to clarify. But the DA was asked, was it an all-white jury? It was an all-white jury going on, and we feel comfortable saying yes about that right now. But the fact that the jury was from 300 plus miles away from Memphis, I'm not sure how much the viewers are familiar with the demographics of Tennessee, and you know, Memphis is over here on the border with Arkansas. You have to go all the way across the state, 300 plus miles, to find a jury. Completely different makeup of people. Memphis being a predominantly African-American city, Chattanooga and Hamilton County not being predominantly African-American. So did that play a role? We'll have to see. Now, they did poll the jury before they read the verdicts, and they basically had to say, was this unanimous? And they kind of do that to make sure that everything is, you know, I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And it was unanimous. But until somebody's able to speak to the jury and hear, you know, maybe what swayed them in that room, it's kind of hard to tell. You heard the DA Mulroy say, you never know what a jury is going to decide, how they're interpreting evidence. We're not even sure, you know, if there was questions. Usually if there's a jury question, It'll come out to the judge and go back and forth, but that wasn't asked during the course. Did you have any questions or clarifications? So we didn't hear about that. Obviously, the family being very disappointed in the state case. They're going to have to look to see what happens on the federal level when it comes to the sentencing and the civil trial. Mistakes, if there was mistakes made during the state and the federal, the civil trial being the last one kind of has the last chance to look at and say, okay, don't make this mistake again. Let's see if we can get it right on this time. And maybe if that happens, that's where there's possible reform, and that's what the DA has been saying there.
Rebecca, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. There's a different burden of proof, which is much lesser in the civil cases. And it's important to watch what happens in those cases. It's less obviously slashy. And there's I think it's less satisfying for victims and some of the advocates for the victims. But I think, you can see consequences there that are important and really, change going forward.
Rebecca Roifi and Omar Villafranca, thank you for joining us on this breaking news.
Let's see if we can keep it going. We'll go ahead and Mr. Zellke. All right. When we left off, I'd asked you if you recognize that fella, if anybody or an MPD officer had said anything to you about oxygen levels. In other words, Tyre Nichols, his O2 levels look low. His O2 is getting lower. Do you recall conversations like that?
I recall one of them saying that, does he look all right? As far as like O2, asking about O2 levels, I don't recall hearing anything about that.
All right. Let's see if we can back into it another. You, on direct examination, at least the way I took your answer, was that you were called out on this dispatch to treat Mr. Hemphill for pepper spray. Did I misunderstand your answer about what the purpose of your arriving at Rains and Ross Road was?
No, sir.
I didn't misunderstand what you said.
No, sir.
When the dispatch to your fire station came in, tell me if I'm wrong, they didn't tell you who your patient was. They just said you had a chemical spray incident at Rains and Ross Road. Is that right?
No, sir. When it came over the loudspeaker, it says assault, and then it tells us the location of what equipment is going. So in this case, it was assault, and it was the intersection of Rains and Ross Road, and our engine company that was responding. And then on the inside of the cab, we have a mobile data transmitter, which is our computer that's inside the piece of equipment. Dispatch can put notes in that dispatch log, and in the log it said police officer sprayed by pepper spray.
Okay, and that is the Memphis Fire Department dispatch log that you're talking about?
Yes,
right?
sir.
Not Memphis Police Department?
No, sir.
So if Memphis Police Department said something different to the Memphis Fire Department, and Memphis Fire Department didn't say something different to your in-cab camera, you don't have anything to do with that? You don't know how that could have happened, right?
No, sir.
Okay.
Get your free copy of my new best-selling book, Commercial Real Estate Investing for Beginners. All you have to do is click on the link below and a copy will be sent to you instantly. Hi, I'm Peter Harris. I'm the author of this book. I'm also the author of one of the most successful commercial real estate books out there in print today, and that is Commercial Real Estate Investing for Dummies. So why am I giving away this book to you for free today? Well, first of all, this is the book I wish I had when I first started. And secondly, I'm hoping that this book will help you get on the right track from the very beginning and avoid some of the mistakes.
That's why when you came walking up to Hemphill,
I'm beginning to think,
Hemphill said, I have some
that
spray,
old
but you're here for the suspect down
the
there.
wizard.
He told you what you're there about, right?
He told us that there was, at another location, that there was an incident that took place. That there was another suspect over there, but for us it's patient.
But you thought it was another patient?
He told us that there was another patient down the street from us, but we were originally dispatched to Ross Road in Rains.
But you keep using the word another patient. So were you being led to believe by someone that there were two patients, one cop, one suspect, or two incidents? Or what were you being led to believe, and by whom?
it was two separate incidents. When the first incident we were dispatched to was Ross Road and Rains. That was the incident we were initially dispatched. We didn't find out about a second incident until after our interaction with Officer Hemphill.
And did Hemphill also tell you that the suspect had been tased?
He said that the tasers were deployed and the OC spray was used.
And did he say that they had been fighting with the suspect? I think he used the word fighting with the suspect.
To my knowledge, he said that that they were in an altercation with him. As far as like currently, I didn't know if they were still having an altercation down the street or just at that scene.
Yeah, but I'm only talking about Hemphill because Hemphill's not at the other scene. Did Hemphill tell you that that the suspect or someone, a patient, had been tased, had been sprayed, and had been in an altercation with the cops? Did Hemphill tell you or lead you to believe those things?
It led me to believe that taser was used, OC spray was used, and that the suspect took off.
Okay. Now, you then went down to Bear Creek and Castlegate, and I'm going to be playing for you a body-worn camera of Officer Mills that I have coordinated with the District Attorney's Office starting at 2050:03. If you could, 1, cross your fingers, 2, watch the video. This is going on. About how long have you been standing around, in your best estimate, been standing around there with the patient? Because the patient's at your feet, just out of view, isn't he?
Yes, sir.
About how long have you been standing there?
If I had to guess, maybe 3 minutes.
Okay, fair enough. Now, that's you on the left, and I would offer to you, see the black fella with the hoodie on and a baseball cap, and he's got white bottom tennis shoes. You see that fellow that's handing you something?
Yes, sir.
I would offer to you, and I think there's no dispute, that is Justin Smith, who I introduced you to earlier. Okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Where is Mr. Tyre Nichols at this point in your treatment?
At
this point, where is he?
He's still sitting next to the patrol car.
Okay. And you've told me that Hemphill told you there was a taser used and OC spray used. And then you've told us that you got off your fire truck and you grabbed your trauma bag. Isn't it Memphis Fire Department policy to not only get the trauma bag for someone who has trauma, bleeding, injury, and also get your what's called a green bag, which is a small oxygen canister? Isn't that the procedure and policy of the Memphis Fire Department when you get off your truck?
Yes, sir, but it's under the guidance of the highest level of care on the scene.
So it's somebody else's fault you didn't get the green bag?
I was just instructed by my highest level of care to bring the blue bag.
Okay. You're an EMT, right?
Yes, sir.
Emergency medical technician. At this point in your treatment, or treatment under the care of your senior person, has it crossed your mind at this point in the treatment that this patient may need oxygen?
No, sir.
Okay. I'm going to hit play at 205021. Are you and the other fellow, the senior fellow, are y'all providing any medical care right now?
Just observe, just overwatching and make sure that he doesn't harm himself.
Have you or the other EMT, have y'all laid hands on the patient yet?
Yes, sir, we have.
You have?
Yes, sir.
Okay, mark that time. 8:50 p.m. You are testifying that you have laid hands and begun treatment on the patient, but now you're just observing. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, sir.
Is that Mr. Nichols' feet flopping around? Do you need to get up?
I can see it, sir. Yes, sir.
Is Mr. Nichols' feet flopping around?
Yes, sir.
Are you even looking at the patient like that?
Just then I was. But I hear the sirens of the unit approaching.
Well, you volunteered. I didn't ask anything, but since you did volunteer, I need to ask it. So because you hear sirens coming from some direction, you're gonna not treat anymore?
No, sir.
Okay. I didn't know what you meant by volunteering that. But you're saying you hear the ambulance coming. Is that what you just said?
Yes, sir.
Okay. See the man in white tennis shoes?
Yes, sir.
Right here, what are you looking for?
His wallet so police can have his ID.
All right, thank you. What did you just ask Sanders for?
I don't recall. I wasn't able to hear it in the video.
Has an O2, you an O2 monitor is?
Yes, sir.
Measures oxygen rate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Has an O2 monitor been placed on the patient as of right now?
No, sir.
Has a blood pressure cuff or any type of monitoring equipment at all been placed on the patient at this point?
No, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't say it, Mr. Stiegel. I'm starting back up at 205209. Which one of y'all are observing Tyrie right now?
I'm off screen, but I'm facing towards him.
Oh, just out of scene. Is that Nichols' feet flopping around now? He's rolled over on his left side?
Yes, sir.
Did you say earlier that you heard the ambulance siren? Where'd he go?
We could hear it from a long distance away. It wasn't close enough, but we could hear it coming.
Is that Mr. Nichols trying to lift himself back up?
Yes, sir.
Is that what you meant when you put in your report that he was alert and oriented?
I didn't fill the report out, sir.
Somebody else did.
As far as like the EPCR, no, sir, I didn't fill that out. But my grand jury, yes, sir. This is prior to the assessment for alert and oriented was prior to this.
I hear sirens now, do you?
Yes, sir, they're a little bit closer at this point.
Yeah. Is that Mr. Nichols now rolled over on his left side?
Yes, sir.
Now he's on his back?
Yes, sir.
Rolling on to his right side?
Yes, sir.
And where are you?
I'm still standing off screen looking at him.
Well, I'm not a doctor or anything, but how's that man supposed to be able to breathe if he's laying flat on his back or rolling around on the concrete?
He can still breathe if his airway, if he has his neck up, he can still breathe. It's not obstructing his airway.
You did check his airway?
I mean, he's able to move around on his own, and he's able to move air.
So is your position because he's moving, he must be breathing?
tells me he's got a good pulse and to be able to move on his own. It would be able to. I'm not just an EMT. I'm just very basic of it.
All right, let me move on. 2054 04-ish, 03-ish.
More clearly. They're closer to the scene.
You know, when you first told us you heard sirens, did you happen to know what time it was?
No, sir, I didn't.
It was 20:51, 3 minutes ago.
Yes,
Where's
sir.
this ambulance coming from?
I don't know where they're coming from because the ambulances go all over the city.
Somebody just asked you.
Is he all right?
You don't recognize the voice, so I'm not going to ask you. But was it a cop or a fire department man that said that?
It wasn't either one of our voices. It says police officer.
Same voice said what?
I didn't catch it.
I'll replay it. At 20:54:53, a voice that you said is not a fire department person said, "He all right?" You heard that, right?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall someone asking you there that night with your own independent memory?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to hit play, and that same voice asked a follow-up question. If you could please listen. Did you hear that?
It was very quiet. I still didn't catch it.
Did it sound like you sure? You sure? You sure?
Not to my knowledge.
Do you recall that of your own independent recollection that night, where somebody says, "Is he all right?"
I remember that, yes, sir.
And did you answer that question when that cop asked you that question?
No, sir. I believe I started moving towards the patient and started doing my sternal rub.
But you didn't answer the question of the cop.
No, sir. Not to my knowledge.
Before we go any further, what's your understanding of who is responsible for medical care once you arrive on an active scene in the city of Memphis working for the Memphis Fire Department? Who's in charge of the medical care of whatever patient, whatever...
8 Sleep's brand new Pod 4 is truly incredible right out of the box. Installation is pretty simple. This goes over your bed like a fitted sheet, and it creates the perfect temperatures for sleeping, all while tracking your sleep without a wearable. Laying on it right away, and it definitely feels premium, and it just feels like an extension of your mattress. So my first impression is it is downright incredible and a piece of tech that genuinely improves sleep and my quality of life. Just use the link below and let me know how you like the Pod 4 when you get it.
Whatever suspect, whatever heart attack victim, when you arrive at a crime scene or a police-involved scene, who is in charge of the medical treatment there on that scene?
The highest level of care.
Elmer Fudd language.
In this case, it was the advanced EMT. The highest level of care assumes the primary care of each and every patient on every scene, regardless of what the scene is.
Then you were not number 1 guy, you were what, number 2 guy?
Yes, sir.
And what is the number 2 guy's role?
The EMT's role as far as assisting the higher level of care is considered the gopher. So and what I mean by that is that if the advanced EMT needs something brought to the scene that wasn't initially brought to the scene, the advanced EMT advises the EMT to go grab that said piece of equipment while he can maintain patient care.
Okay, thank you for that. And the senior EMT, I think you called him, I could be wrong, that was the black fellow named Sanders, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you were the number 2 man, or as you say, the gopher, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So if Tyre Nichols was getting no care, no basic life support care, you're telling us and the jury that it's Sanders' responsibility, not yours. Is that what you're telling us?
That as far as I don't assume primary care, even if he doesn't completely terminate care, and he would have to relay that to his partner. If he doesn't give me any signs, I wouldn't know.
Isn't Tyre Nichols giving you and Sanders the signs that he is struggling there at the scene? Are you just going to sit there and say, well, I'm going to wait till Sanders tells me to do something? Is that what your position was that night?
No, sir.
Well, then what was it? You're an EMT hired by the Memphis Fire Department to provide medical care at a secondary gopher level or whatever to victims in Memphis. Who was taking care of Tyre Nichols while he was laying on the ground?
It was the advanced EMT. He was
advanced EMT. All right, I'll move on here. That's the advanced EMT with his hands in his pocket?
Yes, sir.
All right. What is that bag that the advanced EMT is moving?
That would be the cardiac monitor.
So the cardiac monitor has not been unboxed or unpackaged as of this time?
It was unpackaged and he repackaged it back up earlier in the video.
Okay. Moving on at 20:55:10. So he sets the bag down. I'm sure somebody here will be interested. Was that a cop or a fireman that asked, do you have an ETA on your unit?
That was a police officer that asked.
We're now at 20:55:20, and I still don't see an ambulance. Do you?
They just pulled up on the scene. They just arrived on scene, but they haven't made it up to the scene yet.
Did you hear somebody say, stand him up, sit him on his butt?
He was already sitting up. I had the other officer help me lift him up, and then I continued to administer sternal rubs.
We're about to get to the officer setting him up. But as it stands right now, Tyre Nichols is not sitting up in a recovery position, is he? He's laying flat on the concrete.
Not that I recall. It's hard to see from this angle of it.
Well, you did see him flopping around on the concrete on his side and on his back and on the left. You did see that, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And are you trying to say that Mr. Nichols was able to put himself back up against the car?
No, sir.
Okay. So if Mr. Nichols gets put in a medical recovery position, Mr. Nichols is not going to be able to do it himself, can he?
No, sir.
And so you just heard a voice, and I'm asking you, was it a cop or was it a fireman that said, get him on his butt? Who was that? Was it a cop or a fireman?
That was a police officer.
Why is a police officer telling you to put your patient in the recovery position?
My advanced EMT stepped off, and I was going to maneuver to the other side and get an officer to help me lift him up.
All right, let's watch that. Is that same officer with the baseball hat on?
Yes, sir.
All right, and then there's another police officer there helping him, is that right?
On the other side of him, sir?
I'll remind you. 10 seconds. I'm at 20:55:29. now the sternal rub occurs, right?
No, sir. Prior to lifting him up, I did another sternal rub. That's where I was saying, hey man, prior to us moving, I did a sternal rub there. He responded to pain. And then even here, he responded to pain.
Where's the advanced EMT that you report to at this point? Providing medical care.
I don't know where he went off to.
All right, not a doctor, but if you do a sternal rub on somebody for 15 seconds, is that because the person is gone what otherwise might be referred to as non-responsive?
I did it multiple times, and then he responded to I believe the third initial time that I did the sternal rub, he responded to pain.
Okay, you must have missed my point. Do you do sternal rubs on people that are responsive and breathing and healthy?
No, sir.
You do sternal rubs on someone who's non-responsive or unconscious to see if that will stimulate what pain so that they'll jerk around, right?
Yes, sir.
So, you've now told us you've done 2 or 3 sternal rubs on this guy, and I'm asking you, that was because Mr. Nichols was unresponsive and looked unconscious, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at this point, has it crossed your mind to put this man on oxygen?
Yes, sir. Now, at this point, it did. Yes, sir.
Well, where's your oxygen bag?
On the piece of equipment.
What, to block up the road?
Yes, sir.
Moving on at 20:56:25. That's more sternal rub, isn't it? That you're doing?
Yes, sir.
Are you Mr. Nichols speak to me? That's
Yes,
more
sir.
sternal rub, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I don't see anybody going to get an oxygen bag.
My advanced EMT hadn't returned back to me yet at this point.
Earlier when I asked you where he went, you said you didn't know where he went. So are you trying to tell us now that you figured out that he must have gone back for the oxygen bag?
No, sir. That's just, he hasn't came back to where we were. At this point, I still don't know where he's at.
All right. Didn't play again at 205644.
Whoa!
Yes?
How do you sleep at night?
On a mattress from Mattress Firm. I sleep.
At the Memorial Day sale, save up to $800 on Stearns & Foster. Get matched at Mattress Firm, sleep at night.
Did you hear what that black officer with the baseball hat just told you? Did you hear what he just told you?
Yes, sir.
What did he say?
What is his oxygen?
I'll play it again for you so maybe you can try. There you go. Did he say his oxygen is low?
Still hard for me to hear.
Do you have any independent recollection that night that black officer with the baseball hat on said something about his oxygen level being low? Because when I first started asking these questions, you said you don't remember any cop saying anything to you about oxygen. But does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Is that advanced EMT Sandridge that I see moving around behind the black cop?
Yes, sir.
So he's come back?
Yes, sir.
Did he bring the green bag with him?
No, sir.
So when you saw that he didn't bring the oxygen bag back with him, did you run to go get the oxygen bag?
Yes, sir, I did.
Hold that thought.
sir.
Oh. So that's at least 3 times I've heard the same officer with a black baseball hat on say something about low oxygen to you.
I was getting, two bag at this point. I ran into the paramedic.
Do you think
based on my knowledge. Yes, sir. I know at one point I did.
Let's see if this refreshes your recollection. When the ambulance arrived, the man in charge, I think his name was Guy, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
The head paramedic on that vehicle told you to go get the stretcher, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
You've testified that when you went to go get the stretcher, you took the green bag, the oxygen bag, for the first time off and put it on the stretcher. Do you recall testifying to that?
I put it on the ground.
I'm sorry. Beg your forgiveness. You put it on the ground. And when you went to roll the stretcher away, you said that your Lieutenant Whitaker, for some reason, had taken the oxygen bag and put it back on the truck. Do you recall testifying that way?
Yes, sir.
So even after the ambulance got there, even after you went to get the green bag and instead came back with a stretcher, you still didn't come back with a green bag, did you?
The back of the stretcher has an O2 bottle and nasal cannulas and non-rebreathers on the back of them.
All right. Judge, I'm going to go through this portion of the video because this is the business now. All right, let me go to Mr. Beans's. Were y'all able to find it on? That's okay. Now, hold on. May I speak with co-counsel, my client, for a moment ago? Okay. Y'all like using So we got this. I'm through.
Okay. So, is your co-counsel?
Terry, you're up. Yes. You said that you remember riding to St. Francis Hospital.
Yes, sir.
And you said you remembered a gentleman with a MPD, I think you call him a beanie or hat.
Yes, sir.
And if Darius Bean stand up, do you remember seeing the face that would have been in the passenger seat of that ambulance?
Yes, sir. He looks familiar.
Is that no familiar?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
But you didn't know him by name or anything that night?
No, sir.
But if I tell you that that was the person in that vehicle, would you disagree with that?
No, sir.
It looks like it.
Yes, sir.
And do you remember him at any point doing anything to obstruct the ability to administer care to Mr. Nichols, who was been in the back of the ambulance?
No, sir. Not that I recall. No, sir. He was in the front of the ambulance, so no, sir.
Right. And when you would have seen him at the hospital, was he in the way?
No, sir.
And when you were on that scene, did he actually try to do anything to obstruct you from the care that you were trying to administer at that time?
No, sir. The first time I saw him was actually in the unit.
Right.
We call ambulances units, so I'm sorry, I'm going to use that synonymously.
And so on the scene, did you ask him any questions about the condition of Mr. Nichols?
Not that I recall.
Do you recall asking him anything about what would have happened on the scene prior to you arriving?
No, sir. Not that I recall.
Now, you would have been a level of care higher than Darius Bean as it related to health care, right?
Yes, sir.
And you had actually had training in the military, correct?
Yes, sir.
Matter of fact, a few weeks before January 7, 2023, you just got back from Djibouti, Africa, right?
Yes, sir.
And you have actually seen people injured, correct?
No, sir.
You've never seen anybody injured?
Prior to on Memphis fire? Or, yes. Oh, yes, sir.
All right. And prior to the experience on that night, in other words, you've seen injuries before.
Yes, sir.
And you've asked people about what happened to this person on this particular scene at different occasions, correct?
Yes, sir.
And on that particular evening, and I know in a few minutes you might be asked questions about what was said to you one way or the other. If you had questions about this person who you're observing, according to what you testified to earlier, you did see blood, right?
Yes, sir.
And you did see contusion to the head, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you did see the person laid up against a vehicle and moving around, right?
Yes, sir.
You asked questions of the person that you had a conversation with, correct?
Yes, sir.
And on that particular scene, there was nothing that you asked any of the officers regarding what happened on that scene, right?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't ask about what happened as it relates to how did this person get in this condition? What was he doing? Was he trying to run from you? Any of those types of questions, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Your questions and what you did were based on your experience, right?
Yes, sir.
And according to your testimony, and I think your grand jury testimony as well, the higher or ranking level of care on that scene that particular evening was Mr. Sandridge, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sandridge, did you hear him asking any of those type of questions that I just asked you if you asked?
No, sir, not that I recall.
You didn't hear him asking anything about what happened on that scene? How did he get in a particular condition? Nothing like that, right?
No, sir.
Now, when you gave grand jury testimony, you're in the room with people that are only from the government, right?
That's my assumption. I don't know personnel.
You see any of us in the room with you?
No, sir.
We weren't asking you questions like right now, right?
Yes, sir.
And you've been asked questions over at the grand jury and in that building a few different times, right?
Yes, sir.
But as it relates to what happened on that particular scene, on that particular night, none of these officers did anything to obstruct your ability to do your job. Yes or no? Did they obstruct you?
As far as like knowing like which officers were where, no, sir. Not that I know there was officers like constantly going throughout the scene, but as far as like knowing who they were, I don't know.
Let me ask you this way: Darius Bean, did he stop you from your ability to render care?
No, sir. Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
He didn't leave your bag from the truck or anything like that, right?
No, sir.
And he didn't stop you from your ability to go get your bag or do whatever you needed to do as you were asked questions by Mr. Zuma regarding going back and forth to the truck that you were there on, or the engine that you were there on. He didn't obstruct you,
no,
right?
Sir.
And you got there because police officers told you all where to go, correct?
Yes, sir.
And once you got there, nobody did anything to stop you from doing your job. They had MPD on their badge, on their chest.
Not that, as far as like these officers go, not to my knowledge as far as these officers.
And more precise, one more time before I sit down, to Darius Bean, he didn't stop you, and you recognize him from riding to the hospital in the same vehicle with Mr. Darius Bean, right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
This scene that you responded to is a lot different than other scenes you've been on, right?
Very different, yes, sir.
Yeah. Tell me what you mean by that.
This is the most chaotic scene that I've ever responded to, and
my oldest daughter, Camilla, 2 days old, she had to have open heart surgery. All of a sudden, she's on 5 different medications. GoodRx can save you a lot of money. So it puts less stress on our household, and it puts less stress on our pockets.
Save up to 80% on your prescriptions with GoodRx. Download the free app.
This was my first day back prior, and I've only had a year on the street prior. This and that. As far as like, I've interacted with MPD before, and it was just not. It just felt different as far as being on that scene.
About the way the officers were acting?
A little bit, yes, sir.
About the way they were treating you?
As far as like pepper spray, taser, the information that was given, that's all the information I had.
All you were told was pepper spray, taser, and he ran from the police, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, how many of the police officers, including Mr. Bean, ever told you that he had received impact to the head?
None.
None?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
How many told you that, in fact, he had been kicked really, really hard in the head?
Not to my knowledge, sir. No, sir.
Or that he'd been kicked again in the head.
I wasn't given that information.
Or he'd been hit with 5 haymakers to the head.
I wasn't given that information.
Or that he had been hit twice while he was down after all of that.
That wasn't given to me.
You were given information that he looked high or he was acting high, though, right?
Yes, sir.
Like on drugs?
Yes, sir.
And that information, did it influence the care that you gave him?
Yes, sir.
If you had been told that he had received devastating head blows, would that have impacted the care you give him?
Yes, sir.
But you weren't given that information.
No, sir, I was not.
But you did give him some care, right?
Yes, sir.
One of the things you talked about was you looked at his eyes, right?
Yes, sir.
And what did you say about his eyes?
That they were pinpoint.
And is it true that pinpoint pupils could correlate to drug use, like being high?
Yes, sir.
Is it true they could also correlate with significant neurological brain damage, like the shifting of brain tissue?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. He's not qualified. He's not a medical doctor. He testified as to based
Your Honor, we can approach.
His testimony was that it was indicative of being high. He didn't give a conclusory answer to that regarding whether or not he had been. He said that's what the indicia was. Now, he's asking him about neurological shifting of the brain, etc. He's not qualified to do that. He's not even qualified, according to him, to get a bag off the truck without somebody telling him. So he definitely can't answer this question about neurological deficits.
Yes, my question was not about neurological deficits. My question was about the pinpoint pupils and whether that could be a sign of neurological damage. Counsel asked if pinpoint pupils could be a sign of drug use. He's qualified to answer that. He answered that. Now he's been asked if pinpoint pupils can indicate neurological brain damage, and he's qualified to answer that. He answered that.
If the witness knows the answer, the court will allow him to answer the question.
You answered that question, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you had been told about impacts to the head, there's medical stuff you could have done, right?
Like for impacts to the head, as far as like internal injuries, no, sir.
Not asking if you could perform surgery. Are there things you could have done out there different had you known that there were significant impacts to his head?
Yes, sir.
For instance?
C-collar, C-spine.
And what's a C-collar?
It's a neck brace that holds your cervical vertebrae, which is the upper vertebrae in your spine. It holds it in place to keep you from moving your neck and further injuring yourself.
And is that important when you have neurological damage like that?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever ask to have the patient unhandcuffed?
Yes, sir, I did.
And was the patient unhandcuffed?
No, sir.
Do you remember who you asked about unhandcuffing the patient?
I remember asking one of the police officers. I don't have a name to be able to
So to be fair, you do not know if it was one of these police officers or not?
No, sir.
But did you ask the police officers to unhandcuff the patient?
Yes, sir.
Was that granted or denied?
It was denied.
Did that hinder your ability to do what you're doing?
Yes, sir.
That's all my questions.
Mr. Long, when you were at Castlegate and Bear Creek, January 7th, 2023, did you know about any punches to the head?
No, sir.
Did you know about any kicks anywhere on the body?
No, sir.
Did you know about the use of an aspartame?
No, sir.
Had you been there and seen that?
Like, I'm sorry, what are you guys, like, if I was arrived earlier to the scene?
You didn't see any kicks to Mr. Nichols, correct?
No, sir.
And you didn't see the use of an asp-baton by Mr. Nichols, correct?
No, sir.
And you didn't see any punches to Mr. Nichols, correct?
No, sir.
So if you weren't, it's because you weren't there when that occurred, correct?
Yes, sir.
If you're not there, you have to be told, correct?
Yes, sir.
So if you weren't there when punches were thrown, can't tell an EMT about it, correct?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question.
If Demetrius Haley was not present to observe punches, he couldn't tell you about it, correct?
I think that requires speculation. Objections for speculation.
I'll withdraw the question. Mr. Haley, would you stand up for a minute? Do you recall seeing Officer Haley at Cascade and Bear Creek?
Not to my knowledge. I don't know names, or at that time I didn't know names or who they looked like.
Just stand up again, Mr. Haley. Do you recognize the gentleman standing as having been at Cascade and Bear Creek that night?
I don't know who police officers were there. As far as like the names of the police officers that were there, like I can see them here now, but as far as like being able to, I can give you a description of them, but as far as like seeing them, I couldn't tell you if I saw them or not, if I recall seeing them there or not.
Okay. So the gentleman who was just standing that I referenced right now as Demetrius Haley, do you recall him being at Castlegate and Bear Creek January 7th, 2023?
No, sir, I don't recall.
And you were previously you were asked by Mr. Hagerman questions about if you had known about punches or kicks, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what you would have done differently was put the C-collar on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Nothing else different?
I would have done a lot more differently. As far as like my care, like probably cutting his clothes off, trying to get him to where he's, we call it trauma naked. So cutting his clothes off down to his undergarments, and then to where we can expose the body to be able to see any physical damage.
And you would have done that if you'd have known about kicks or punches, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you have done it if Advanced EMT Sandridge had not told you to do it?
I'm sorry, as in, like, if he told me not to do it, or told me to do it?
If he had not instructed you to do that,
would
you still have done it?
If I found out that information, I still would have done it.
So that's, unlike when Mr. Zumak was asking you questions about your care, and you said that's up to Advanced EMT Sandridge. He was in charge of the scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
One reason you didn't go get an oxygen bag back at the truck a block away for so long is because Advanced EMT Sandridge had not told you to do it, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he was in charge of the scene.
Yes, sir.
But if you know about kicks or punches, then you'd have been in charge of cutting clothes off.
Well, I wouldn't have been in charge of it, but if he knew the information as well, then our care would have been different from just thinking it's an overdose.
Yes,
this is why I switched to injection-free weight loss.
I was eating healthy, working out every day, and nothing would budge. I've lost, I think, 22 or 23 pounds at this point.
I noticed that my weight was really starting to creep up and I just wasn't happy with the way that I looked. I have lost around 20 pounds.
Diet, exercise, I felt like I had tried everything. Finally, I stumbled across hers and thought, what do I have to lose? I have lost so far just over 35.
Different from just thinking that it's an overdose.
Do you recall testifying under oath before a federal grand jury?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall being asked whether any officer on the scene told you that Mr. Nichols had been punched? And you said no to the prosecutor?
Yes, sir, I said no.
You were being questioned by a...
More breaking news coverage on the state trial for 3 former Memphis police officers accused of beating Tyre Nichols to death. A verdict coming down from the jury a little more than an hour ago, finding Demetrius Haley, Darius Bean, and Justin Smith not guilty on all charges. Action News 5's Jerry Askin in the courtroom.
Otis Sanford, political analyst here for ABC 24, joining us now. Otis, I just want your initial thoughts and just reactions from today's outcome.
Well, I have 2 sort of extreme reactions. One is I'm not surprised that worse charges, the murder charges, they were found not guilty. I'm not surprised by that. It seems to me that the ones who did the most in terms of causing Tyre Nichols' death are the ones who pled guilty to the charge. So I'm not surprised by that. I am surprised that none of the lesser charges, oppression and failing to follow procedure and things like that, I am surprised that there were no guilty verdicts on any of those, and it doesn't seem like the jury even considered that. That's my initial reaction.
They didn't care.
You know, I think I said before that I'm just not convinced that the prosecution put on enough proof. They had 5 witnesses. They didn't have anybody from the police department that I heard that talked about policies and procedures, which was part of the defense. And so I'm just surprised I was surprised by the lack of a robust prosecution here. Has brought in at least 17 witnesses, and of course you have what appears to be a police-friendly jury here. Those are my initial reactions.
Yeah, you're echoing a lot of the same notes that Pastor Fisher had here.
I stole his notes. And I didn't. I stole his notes and I beat him here. Right. And I was driving, didn't even hear it, so I didn't steal his.
No, for sure. One of the things that District Attorney Mulroy said was the fact that they felt like they did everything they could have. He couldn't really think back, and he wasn't going to take it there, essentially, just what they should or shouldn't have done. What do you think about his reaction coming out of the courtroom? And he is, proud of his team. They've worked hard. Clearly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I heard some of that when I was preparing to come down. That's what you expect. I mean, he's not going to get out there and trash his team. These are experienced prosecutors. Mr. Hagelman is very experienced, so he's not going to do that. But I just say,
joined now by ABC 24 anchor Pepper Baker, who has been joining us just now in the studio to help give us some extra reaction on exactly what's going on. Pepper, thanks for joining us.
Ruben, thank you. Yes, to give us just a little bit more perspective is Pastor Earl Fisher, a friend of our show from Abyssinian Baptist Church. Thank you so much for being here.
Nice for having me back.
Yes, thank you. So we did talk about this just last week. I want to touch on that interview, but first off, just your reaction.
Heart-wrenching, disappointing, frustrating, agonizing. My heart goes out to Brother Rodney and Sister Rovon Wells and the Tyre Nichols family. And I mean, if I'm honest, my initial impulse is akin to Nina Simone, who said, Mississippi, goddamn, Memphis, goddamn. I don't know what to make of this in terms of the truth and justice of it all, because this definitely doesn't seem to align with what I understand about truth and justice. And so there's definitely going to be some things we have to reconsider over the next few days and weeks and months and years. If you look at the state of policing, and I heard DA Mulroy commentate on the need for continual advocacy around criminal justice reform, I think this shows us just how far we are from any type of semblance of criminal justice reform that protects Black lives. Because if you can be killed on video and you can be brutalized the way that Tyre Nichols was, and people who were a part of it, all with a policy duty to intervene, are not found culpable to any degree of any of these charges, I don't know how anybody who believes in truth and justice could actually stand for this.
Now, you said last week when we met that I asked you, what does justice look like in this trial? And you said it's whatever the family, but specifically Rovon Wells, wants out of the conviction. So you already touched on it, but how do you think that she's processing this information right now?
Man, I don't want to speculate on her reaction any more than I want to, commentate on some of the shortcomings that I saw in the prosecution. I think in a sense all of this is a kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, but I do think we need to honor the humanity of Sister Rovon, Brother Rodney, the Nichols family, and the humanity of Tyre Nichols. And I don't think that this result, this verdict represents that. I think fundamentally, Pepper, we're in between what I see as
emergencies can strike at any time. That's why it's crucial to be prepared. Create
as culture and policy. There's clearly a gap, because C.J. Davis got on national television in 2023 and said unequivocally that the officers, all 5 of them, violated policy and did not follow their training. And now we have a verdict here saying what they did was in alignment with training and policy. And I didn't see the prosecution put on the same type of zealous prosecution that they did for the YOUNGDOLPH murder trial. They called 17 witnesses in the YOUNGDOLPH murder trial. In this one, they called 5. And the defense called 17. And if I'm honest, from what I saw, I didn't see the entirety of it, but I sat in that courtroom right behind Sister Rovon and Brother Rodney. Now, I saw basically all-white jury do something that I had not known all-white juries do, which is try to humanize Black defendants. And I don't think they were doing it because they were Black. I think they were doing it because they were police officers.
Exactly.
I saw and I heard and I felt this gap between what people say is policy as it relates to criminal justice reform, but a culture of policing that justifies and validates this, that in all likelihood is going to get worse as you got the federal government and the president of the United States sending signals that policing like this is not only appropriate, but in a lot of ways encouraged. This is a dangerous precedent and a dangerous moment to be in. And so my heart and my prayers are with the family of Tyre Nichols. I know there's more to come, but I don't know who can be objectively proud of this result.
A lot to unpack there, because that was quite a passionate statement you gave. So I do want to kind of go back to where you felt the prosecution calling 5 witnesses and then the defense calling 17. So where did you feel at what moment the defense might have carried or had the game, not the game, but the trial more in their favor?
So I sensed a rather zealous defense from the jump. They were extremely passionate. I didn't feel that same energy from the prosecution, honestly, until I think it was the district attorney, Tanisha Johnson, gave that final kind of rebuttal. And then I saw kind of pieces come together from a prosecutorial standpoint. But again, I don't think if these are not police officers that you only end up with 5 witnesses being called. I listened to my dear brother Andre Warden commentate earlier
Hold on, let me get to, oh boy. Let me hear this. Let me hear this.
What that grossly unqualified Pete Hegseth, who stands up talking about lethality. Oh, it's all about, we're going to have this lethal fighting force. And this is what Republicans have...
Was she heard?
Demetrius Haley just... Cops joined us right now. Folks, stunning decision out of Memphis where an all-white jury, not from Memphis, but from a neighboring county, Hamilton County, cleared 3 of the former Memphis cops in the beating death of Tyre Nichols. This was completely stunning to so many different people. This was the state trial. Now remember, they had already been convicted in federal trial, but sentencing was delayed until the outcome of this state trial. And because of all the attention, they chose the jury from Hamilton County. Deliberated 8.5 hours. Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, Justice Smith Jr. were all charged with and cleared of second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, official misconduct, and official oppression. This is what was the verdict when it was read in the courtroom.
Demetrius Haley, not guilty.
Yeah, I'll be back. I'll be back under a different live. I'll be back a little later. This is just too much for me right now. I need... This is very alarming to me. And I say that because of who's in office and what his mission is. It's just not good. And my people who feel like it's okay to not follow orders by the police, whether you think you're doing something wrong or not, whether you think you have your rights or you know your rights, we need to be clear. Your rights, for the most part, are only enforced if you feel like your rights are being violated. You can only enforce them in the court of law. You cannot enforce what you think is your rights face to face with the police like that. They're going to always have the upper hand. It's going to always be their job. And if you feel like your rights are being violated, you have to take it up legally. Because this right here is a clear sign that magna, what to making America great again, is eliminating black folk. Either by white folk or by black folk. They're okay with it. And they're okay with the police doing whatever they want to do for it to be great again. I the other day I went way back in the 60s, 50s, and 40s, trying to get y'all to understand the mindset even before this verdict. When I saw the wizard up there, that's why I said, I wonder them people, I wonder is he from Chattanooga? Okay, yeah, I'll be back. I'm gonna go ahead and end this. This is almost 4 hours in. Let me go ahead and end this. I'll be back. Prayers to the family.